A 6-year-old girl sits in a whiskey-soaked tavern while grown men debate her price like livestock. Her father's hand grips her shoulder too tight. The room falls silent when he names his offer. Every face turns away, except one. The mountain man standing in the doorway makes a decision that will either save them both or destroy what's left of his broken soul. If you want to see how a single choice in a frozen frontier town changes 2 lives forever, stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The storm hit Black Ridge like God's fist. Gideon Vale felt it coming hours before the first snowflakes fell. That bone-deep ache in his shoulder where a grizzly had mauled him 3 winters back. The way the wind changed direction and started tasting like iron. He'd been trapping in the high country for 2 weeks, sleeping in snow caves and eating jerky so hard it could crack teeth, and he was down to his last match. Time to come off the mountain. The town crouched in the valley like something ashamed of itself. 16 buildings, half of them empty. Black Ridge had been dying since the silver ran out, bleeding people every season until only the desperate and the damned remained. Gideon tied his horse outside Mackey's supply and stomped the snow off his boots. The wind was picking up, screaming down from the peaks with that particular howl that meant the real cold was coming. He had maybe an hour before the storm buried the pass completely. Inside, the place smelled like coffee grounds and mouse droppings. Mackey himself sat behind the counter, picking at his teeth with a splinter. Vale. Mackey didn't look up. Figured the mountains would have killed you by now. Still here. That's what worries me. Gideon grabbed salt, coffee, tobacco, dried beans, the kind of supplies a man buys when he's planning to disappear for another month. He counted out coins onto the counter. Mackey's eyes followed the money. You know the Jenkins place is sitting empty, Mackey said. Been thinking about it? No. Could use a neighbor. Gets lonely up there. That's the point. Mackey shrugged. Suit yourself. But a man alone too long starts forgetting how to be around people. Starts forgetting he's human. Gideon didn't answer. He gathered his supplies and stepped back into the wind. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees in the 15 minutes he'd been inside. His breath froze in his beard. He should have headed straight back up the mountain. Instead, his feet carried him toward the Brass Rail Tavern, and that decision, that one moment of weakness, changed everything. The Brass Rail wasn't brass, and it barely qualified as a tavern. Just a long room with a wood stove, crooked tables, and enough whiskey to keep the remaining citizens of Black Ridge from thinking too hard about their choices. Gideon pushed through the door. Heat and noise hit him like a wall. Maybe 15 men crowded inside, their faces red from drink and firelight. The air tasted like sweat and tobacco and something sour underneath. He found a spot at the bar and ordered whiskey. The bartender, a skeletal man named Pruitt, poured 3 fingers into a dirty glass. Storm's going to be a bad one, Pruitt said. Always is. You staying in town tonight? No. Pruitt nodded like he'd expected that answer. You're crazier than they say, Vale. Maybe. But the cabin up on Widow's Peak had a roof that didn't leak and walls thick enough to keep the wind out, and that was more than most men could claim. Gideon drank. The whiskey burned down his throat, settled warm in his gut. He ordered another. That's when he heard it. $50. The voice came from a table near the stove, loud, slurred, desperate. Gideon didn't turn around, but his hand tightened on the glass. I'm serious, the voice continued. $50 and she's yours. I ain't got no use for her. Someone laughed, nervous, uncomfortable. Another man said something too quiet to hear. Gideon's jaw clenched. He knew that voice. Tommy Brennan. Logger. Drunk. Meaner than a snake and twice as useless. You're out of your mind, Brennan, another man said. You can't sell a kid. Why not? She's mine, ain't she? I feed her. Barely. I'm just cutting my losses. Gideon turned slowly. The table had 4 men around it, cards scattered across the surface, empty bottles clustered like soldiers. Tommy Brennan sat with his back to the stove, his face flushed and greasy with sweat. He was maybe 35 but looked 50. Alcohol and bitterness had aged him hard. Beside him sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Thin as a rail, wearing a dress that might have been blue once but was now just gray with dirt. Her hair hung in tangles around a face so pale it looked like she'd never seen the sun. But it was her eyes that stopped Gideon's breath, huge, dark, and completely empty. She stared at the table like she'd already learned that looking at people only brought pain. "Come on, boys," Brennan said. "One of you's got to want her. She's quiet, does what she's told, won't cause no trouble." "Jesus, Tommy," one of the card players muttered. "This ain't right." "Right?" Brennan's voice rose. "You want to talk about right? Her mama ran off 2 years ago and left me with this. I didn't ask for it. I'm doing what I gotta do." The girl didn't move, didn't react, just sat there like she'd turned to stone. The entire room had gone quiet. Men stared into their drinks. A few got up and left. Nobody wanted to see this. Nobody wanted to know what happened next. Gideon's hands were shaking. He saw another girl in his mind, older, 14, with the same hollow eyes. His sister, Mary. He'd been 16 when their father started bringing men around the house, when the door to Mary's room started opening at night. Gideon had been too young, too scared, too goddamn useless to stop it. 3 months later, Mary walked into the river with rocks in her pockets. "I'll give you 60, Gideon heard himself say. The room went dead silent. Every head turned toward him. Brennan squinted through the smoke, trying to place him. "Who the hell are you?" $60, Gideon repeated. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, flat, hard, final. "Right now." Brennan's face split into a grin. "Well now, didn't think anybody'd actually... You want the money or not?" Something in Gideon's tone wiped the smile off Brennan's face. The drunk stared at him for a long moment, then looked at the girl. "Elsie," he said, "say goodbye to your daddy." The girl didn't move. Brennan grabbed her arm and jerked her to her feet. She stumbled, caught herself on the table, still didn't make a sound. Gideon pulled out his money. The bills felt heavy in his hand. 2 months of trapping, of freezing in the high country, of sleeping in caves and eating snow. Every dollar he had in the world. He walked across the room. Men backed away like he carried plague. Brennan snatched the money and counted it with shaking hands. 60... Yeah, this is good. He shoved the bills in his pocket and looked at the girl like he'd already forgotten her name. "She's yours. Good luck." He grabbed his coat and stumbled toward the door, already heading for the next bottle. Gideon stood there holding $60 less and staring down at a child who looked at him with the eyes of something that expected to be hurt. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, just watched him with that terrible stillness. "I'm Gideon. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, okay?" Nothing. Behind him, Pruitt cleared his throat. "Vale, you know what people are going to say about this, right?" Gideon knew. He could already hear the whispers starting, feel the eyes on his back. "Mountain man living alone buys a child from a drunk. They'd have him hung for a monster before spring." But when he looked at the girl, at Elsie, all he could see was Mary's face the last time he'd seen her alive, the way she'd looked at him like she was already drowning. "Let them talk," Gideon said. He held out his hand. The girl stared at it like it might turn into a fist. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "I promise." She didn't take his hand, but after a long moment, she took a small step toward him. It was enough. The storm was already howling when they stepped outside. Snow fell so thick Gideon could barely see his horse. The wind cut through his coat like knives. Beside him, the girl shivered in her thin dress. She didn't have a coat, didn't have shoes that fit, didn't have anything. "Jesus," Gideon muttered. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her. It swallowed her whole, dragging on the ground. "Come on." He lifted her onto the horse. She weighed nothing, just bones and fear. He swung up behind her and turned the animal toward the mountain pass. "You're crazy, Vale," someone shouted from the tavern doorway. "You'll die up there in this storm." Maybe. But dying in a blizzard sounded better than living with himself if he left her here. The climb was hell. The wind tried to tear them off the horse. Snow piled up so fast the trail disappeared. Twice the horse stumbled and nearly went down. Gideon could barely feel his hands on the reins. In front of him, wrapped in his coat, the girl sat rigid and silent. She hadn't said a word since they left. Hadn't cried, hadn't complained, hadn't even looked at him. "Almost there," Gideon said. His voice was nearly lost in the wind. "Just a little further." The cabin appeared through the snow like a ghost. Small, rough, built from logs Gideon had cut himself. One room with a loft, a stone fireplace, shuttered windows. It looked like exactly what it was, a place for a man to hide from the world. Gideon half fell off the horse, his legs numb from cold. He lifted the girl down and carried her to the door. His fingers were so frozen he could barely work the latch. Inside, the cabin was dark and cold, but it was out of the wind. Gideon set the girl on the floor and fumbled with his tinderbox. His hands shook so bad it took 3 tries to get the kindling lit. Finally, a small flame caught. He fed it carefully, building it up until he could add larger pieces of wood. Light and heat began to fill the room. Gideon turned to look at the girl. She stood exactly where he'd left her, wrapped in his coat, staring at the fire like she'd never seen one before. In the flickering light, he could see her face clearly for the first time. Dirt streaked her cheeks. Her lips were cracked and bleeding from the cold. A bruise darkened her left eye, old, fading to yellow. "You hungry?" Gideon asked. No answer. He found bread in his supplies, hard as a rock but edible if you soaked it in water. He broke off a piece and held it out. The girl looked at the bread, looked at him, didn't move. "It's okay," Gideon said. "Take it." She reached out slowly, snatched the bread from his hand, and retreated to the corner. She held it against her chest like someone might take it away. Gideon's throat tightened. "You can eat it. It's yours." She took a tiny bite, then another. Then she shoved the whole piece in her mouth like she was afraid it would disappear. "There's more," Gideon said quietly. "You don't have to—" She was already reaching for the next piece. He let her eat, watched as she worked her way through half a loaf, drinking water from the cup he gave her in desperate gulps. When she finally stopped, she wiped her mouth with the back of her hand and looked at him with those huge, dark eyes. "What happens now?" she asked. Her voice was so small Gideon almost didn't hear it. "Now?" He sat down on the floor, keeping his distance. "Now you sleep. And tomorrow we figure out the rest." "Are you going to hurt me?" The question hit him like a bullet. "No," Gideon said. "Never." That's what he said. She meant Brennan. And the man before him, and the man before that. Christ, how many times had she been handed from one bastard to another? "I'm not them," Gideon said. "I know you got no reason to believe me. But I'm not." The girl studied his face for a long time. Then she looked around the cabin, at the rough walls, the simple furniture, the rifle hanging above the door. "You live here alone?" "Yeah." "Why?" "Because people are mostly terrible." Something that might have been a smile flickered across her face. It disappeared so fast Gideon wondered if he'd imagined it. "You can sleep up there." He pointed to the loft. "There's blankets. It's warm." She looked at the ladder leading up to the loft, then back at him. "Where will you sleep?" "Down here." "Why?" "So you feel safe." She blinked, like the concept of feeling safe was something she'd only heard about but never experienced. "Okay," she said finally. She climbed the ladder, moving carefully in the too big coat. Gideon heard her moving around up there, settling in. Then silence. He sat by the fire, listening to the storm rage outside. The wind screamed and the cabin shook, and somewhere up in the loft, a 6-year-old girl who'd been sold like property tried to sleep. What the hell had he done? Gideon had no idea how to take care of a child. He could track a deer for 3 days, could survive a blizzard in a snow cave, could kill a man with his bare hands if he had to. But this? A little girl who flinched at sudden movements and hoarded bread like it might be her last meal? He was going to fail her, just like he'd failed Mary. The thought made his hands shake again. He clenched them into fists and stared at the fire until his eyes burned. "Mister?" He looked up. The girl's face appeared over the edge of the loft, pale in the firelight. "Yeah? What's going to happen to me?" Gideon had no good answer, no plan, no idea if he'd even survive the winter, let alone keep a child alive. But he said, "You're going to be okay." "How do you know?" "Because I'm not going to let anything happen to you." She stared at him for a long moment, then she disappeared back into the loft. Gideon added another log to the fire and wrapped himself in a blanket. Outside, the storm tried to tear the mountain apart. Inside, 2 broken people tried to figure out how to trust each other enough to survive until morning. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of wind that sounded like screaming. 3 days of snow piling up until the windows were half buried. 3 days of being trapped in a one-room cabin with a child who barely spoke and looked at him like he might turn into a monster any second. Gideon learned things about Elsie in those 3 days. She was left-handed. She ate like someone who'd spent most of her life hungry. She never cried, even when he could see she wanted to. She watched him constantly, studying his movements like she was trying to figure out when he'd snap. She'd been living like that for years, always waiting for the blow to fall. On the second day, he tried to talk to her. "How old are you?" "6. A pause. "I think." "You don't know?" She shrugged. "Nobody ever told me." "When's your birthday?" "Don't know that either." Gideon felt something crack in his chest. "What about your mother? Where is she?" "Left 2 years ago." "Why?" "Because she didn't want me." She said it like it was a simple fact, like she'd accepted it the way you'd accept rain or snow, just part of how the world worked. "And your father?" "He's not my father." Her voice went flat. "I don't know who is. Mama said it could have been one of 5 men. That's why she left. Said looking at me made her sick." "Jesus Christ." "Tommy, he took me because nobody else would. He said I could work for my keep, but I wasn't big enough to do much, so mostly he just..." She trailed off. "Just what?" "Nothing." But Gideon saw the bruises, saw the way she flinched when he moved too fast, saw the old scars on her arms. On the third day, the storm finally broke. Gideon opened the door to a world buried in white. Snow had drifted up to the roof in places. The sky was that hard, bright blue that only came after big storms, and the temperature had dropped so low his breath froze before it left his lungs. "Want to see something?" he asked Elsie. She came to the door, wrapped in a blanket, and stared. "It's so quiet," she whispered. "That's the best part. After the storm, everything just stops." They stood there together, looking out at the frozen wilderness. The morning sun turned the snow into diamonds. The peaks rose around them like walls, sharp and white against the sky. "Is this where we're going to live?" Elsie asked. "If you want to." "What if I don't?" Gideon looked down at her. "Then I'll take you wherever you want to go." "Anywhere." "Anywhere." She thought about that. "What if I want to stay here?" "Then you stay." "Why would you let me choose?" "Because you're a person. You get to choose." She looked up at him with those huge dark eyes. "Nobody ever let me choose anything before." "Well," Gideon said, "I'm not nobody." For the first time since he'd met her, Elsie smiled. Just a small one, barely there, but real. And Gideon felt something he hadn't felt in years, something that scared him more than any blizzard or grizzly bear or lonely winter night. Hope. The weeks that followed were harder than Gideon expected. Elsie had nightmares. He'd wake in the middle of the night to hear her crying in the loft, quiet, muffled sobs like she was afraid to make noise even in sleep. The first time it happened, he climbed up to check on her. She was curled in a ball, shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," Gideon said softly. "You're okay. You're safe." She jerked awake, scrambling backward until she hit the wall. "It's just me," Gideon said. "You were having a bad dream." She stared at him, breathing hard. I thought you were gone. I thought he came back." "Brennan." She nodded. "He's not coming back, I promise." "You can't promise that." She was right. He couldn't, but he said it anyway. The nightmares didn't stop, but slowly she started letting him comfort her, a hand on her shoulder, a quiet word. Eventually, she'd fall back asleep. During the day, Gideon tried to teach her things she'd need to survive. How to build a fire, how to melt snow for water, how to tell when a storm was coming by the way the wind smelled. She was smart, picked things up fast once she realized he wasn't going to hit her for making mistakes. "Why are you teaching me this?" she asked one afternoon. They were outside checking the snares Gideon had set for rabbits. "Because you need to know." "Why do I need to know?" "Because something might happen to me, and if it does, you need to be able to take care of yourself." She stopped walking. "Are you going to leave?" "No." "Promise?" Gideon looked at her, this skinny, fierce little girl who'd been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love her. I promise. Everyone promises, nobody keeps them. I will. She wanted to believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But trust didn't come easy when you'd been betrayed your whole life. The first rabbit she caught herself changed something. It was a small one, caught in a snare near the creek. Gideon showed her how to reset the trap, how to carry the rabbit without damaging the pelt, how to thank the animal for its life. Why do we thank it? Elsie asked. Because it died so we could eat. That matters. She looked at the rabbit in her hands. Tommy never thanked anything. He just took. Tommy was a fool. Are you going to teach me to skin it? You sure you're ready for that? She nodded. I want to learn everything. So he taught her, showed her how to make the first cut, how to work the pelt free, how to clean the meat. She didn't flinch, didn't look away, just watched carefully and did what he showed her. When they finished, she looked at her bloody hands. I did it, she said quietly. You did. I'm not useless. Gideon's throat tightened. You were never useless. Then why did everyone act like I was? He didn't have an answer for that, just pulled out his canteen and helped her wash the blood off her hands. That night, she asked him the question he'd been dreading. Why did you buy me? They were sitting by the fire, eating the rabbit she'd caught. Outside, the wind howled, but inside it was warm. Gideon set down his plate. You really want to know? Yes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I had a sister, Mary. She was a few years younger than me. Our pa he was like Brennan, maybe worse. Elsie went still. When I was 16, I ran away, left her there with him, told myself I'd come back for her when I had money, when I could take care of both of us. But I was too slow. By the time I came back, he stopped, swallowed hard. She was gone, drowned herself in the river. That's not your fault, Elsie said quietly. Isn't it? You were just a kid. I was old enough to know better, old enough to take her with me, but I was scared. So I left her. The fire crackled. Outside, something howled, a wolf probably, calling to its pack. When I saw you in that tavern, Gideon continued, I saw her, saw myself walking away again, and I couldn't do it twice. Elsie stared at him. So you bought me because I reminded you of your dead sister? No. He looked at her directly. I bought you because nobody else would. Because I know what it's like to be the person everyone ignores. And because I thought maybe if I could help you, it would make up for failing her. Does it? I don't know yet. She nodded slowly. I'm not her. I know. And you're not my father. I know that too. So what are you? Gideon thought about it. I guess I'm just someone who's trying to do better this time. Elsie picked up a piece of wood and tossed it on the fire. Sparks flew up toward the ceiling. Okay, she said finally. That's enough. Oh shit. Spring came late to the high country. The snow started melting in March, turning the trails into rivers of mud. Ice broke up on the creek with sounds like gunshots. And one morning, Gideon woke to the sound of birds, the first he'd heard in months. Elsie had changed. She'd put on weight. Her face had color now instead of that deathly pallor. She laughed sometimes, a sound Gideon hadn't heard for the first month she lived with him. She still had nightmares, still flinched at sudden movements, but the fear in her eyes had faded to wariness. She was healing. But the world outside the cabin hadn't forgotten about them. On a clear April morning, Gideon spotted a rider coming up the trail. He grabbed his rifle and told Elsie to stay inside. The rider was Sheriff Tom Harding, a gray-haired man with sad eyes and a reputation for being fair. He pulled up 50 yards from the cabin and called out, "Vale, need to talk to you." Gideon stepped outside, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. "About what?" "About the girl." "She's fine." "People are talking, saying things." "Let them talk." Harding dismounted, held up his hands to show he meant no harm. "Listen, I don't think you're whatever they're saying, but I got responsibilities. I need to see her, make sure she's all right." Gideon's jaw tightened. She's been through enough without strangers poking at her. "I'm not trying to poke. I'm trying to protect." "She doesn't need protecting from me." "Then let me see her." They stared at each other. Finally, Gideon lowered the rifle. "Elsie, come on out." The door opened. Elsie stepped out wearing pants Gideon had cut down to fit her, a shirt he'd sewn from an old blanket, and boots stuffed with cloth to make them stay on. Her hair was pulled back in a braid. She looked healthy, strong. She also looked terrified. Harding's expression softened. "Hello there." Elsie didn't answer, just moved closer to Gideon. "I'm Sheriff Harding. I'm here to make sure you're being treated right." "I'm fine," Elsie said quietly. "You sure about that?" "Yes." "Has this man hurt you in any way?" "No." "Has he been good to you?" Elsie looked up at Gideon, then back at the sheriff. "He saved my life." Harding studied her face. "How'd he do that?" "He took me away from the man who was killing me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Harding's jaw worked. "Your father?" "He wasn't my father. He was just the drunk who kept me because nobody else would. Gideon's the first person who ever gave a damn if I lived or died." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, but I'm going to need to come back regular. Check on things." "Fine," Gideon said. Harding mounted his horse. "And Vale? You might want to think about making this official. Legal guardian papers. Otherwise, someone's eventually going to try and take her away." He rode off, leaving them standing in the mud. Elsie looked up at Gideon. What did he mean? "He means the law likes paperwork, likes things official." "Are you going to do it? Do you want me to?" She thought about it. "What happens if you don't?" "Eventually they might try to put you somewhere else. With a family in town, maybe. Or send you to an orphanage. I don't want that." "Then I'll do the paperwork." They went inside, but the sheriff's visit had stirred something up. A reminder that the world beyond the mountain hadn't forgotten they existed. And the world, Gideon knew, rarely left people alone when they wanted to be. The paperwork sat on Gideon's table for 2 weeks before he touched it. Legal guardian. The words felt foreign in his mouth, like trying to speak a language he'd never learned. He'd filled out the forms 3 times, crumpled them up, and started over. His handwriting was rough, clumsy. A trapper's hands weren't made for pen and ink. "You're overthinking it," Elsie said one evening. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sharpening her knife the way he'd taught her. 8 years old now, though they'd had to guess at the date. They'd picked March 15th because that's when the first wildflowers bloomed, and Elsie said she wanted her birthday to be when things came back to life. "I'm not overthinking it." "You've been staring at that paper for an hour." "It's important." "Then just sign it." Gideon looked at her. She'd grown since that first night, taller, stronger, her face losing that haunted thinness. She wore her hair in a single braid now, tied off with a piece of leather cord. Her hands were calloused from work. She could shoot straighter than half the men in Black Ridge and track a deer through snow without making a sound. But she was still just a kid, and he was still just a man who had no business being responsible for anyone's life. "What if I'm not good enough?" he asked quietly. Elsie set down the knife. "At what?" "This. Taking care of you. What if I mess it up?" "You already haven't messed it up. Yet." She stood and walked over to him, looked at the papers spread across the table. "You know what Tommy used to say? He said I was a mistake. Said my whole life was just one big accident that nobody wanted." She tapped the paper. "This says different. This says somebody chose me on purpose." Gideon's throat felt tight. "I did choose you." "Then prove it. Sign the damn paper." He almost smiled. She'd picked up his habit of cursing when she was frustrated. He should probably tell her to stop, but hearing her speak her mind, even when she was cussing, felt like a victory. He signed the papers. 2 days later, they rode down to Black Ridge together to file them with the circuit judge. The trail was muddy, the spring runoff turning every creek into a torrent. Gideon watched Elsie handle her horse, a small mare he'd traded 2 wolf pelts for, and felt a flicker of pride. She sat the saddle like she'd been born to it. "You nervous?" he asked. "Should I be?" "Judge Morrison's a hard man. Might ask you questions." "What kind of questions?" "About me. About how I treat you." Elsie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll tell him the truth." "Which is?" "That you're stubborn and you snore and you burn the coffee half the time." She glanced at him. "And that I'm lucky you're the one who walked into that tavern." They rode the rest of the way in silence. Black Ridge looked smaller every time Gideon saw it. More buildings stood empty now, their windows dark and broken. The people who remained moved through the streets like ghosts, going through motions they'd stopped believing in years ago. They tied the horses outside the makeshift courthouse, really just the back room of the general store. Inside, Judge Morrison sat behind a scarred desk, his spectacles perched on his nose, looking over a stack of papers that probably represented every legal transaction in 100 square miles. He looked up when they entered. "Vale? Wasn't sure you'd actually show." "Said I would? You say a lot of things." Morrison's eyes shifted to Elsie. "This the girl?" "Her name's Elsie. Can she speak for herself?" "Yes, sir," Elsie said. Her voice was steady, but Gideon saw her hands clench into fists at her sides. Morrison studied her over his spectacles. "You know why you're here. To make it official." "Official how? So nobody can take me away from him." "And you want that? To stay with this man?" "Yes, sir." "Why?" Elsie lifted her chin. "Because he's a good man, and he takes care of me, and he's never once raised his hand to me or spoken to me mean or made me feel like I was worthless." Morrison was quiet. Then he said, "That's a low bar, child." "It's the only bar I've got." Something flickered in the judge's eyes. Might have been respect, might have been sadness. Hard to tell with a man like Morrison, who'd spent 30 years hearing the worst stories people had to offer. He pulled out the papers Gideon had filled out. Read them slowly, his lips moving slightly. When he finished, he set them down and looked at Gideon. "You understand what you're taking on." "I do. This isn't a dog or a horse. This is a human child who's going to need food and clothing and education, and I know what she needs." "Do you? Because from where I sit, you're a man who lives alone on a mountain and barely comes to town twice a year. That's no kind of life for a growing girl. It's better than what she had." "That's not saying much." Gideon's jaw clenched. "You got a better option?" Morrison was quiet. They both knew there wasn't one. The orphanages were full of kids nobody wanted. The foster families were usually worse than the parents who'd given the kids up in the first place. "I can read and write," Elsie said suddenly. "Gideon taught me, and I can do arithmetic, and I know how to trap and hunt and survive in the wilderness. I know more at 8 than most adults know their whole lives." Morrison looked at her. "That may be, but there's more to life than survival." "Name one thing." The judge blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Name one thing that matters more than surviving, because from where I'm standing, everything else is just decoration." Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Then, incredibly, he laughed. "You're a sharp one, aren't you? Sharp enough to know when someone's looking for reasons to separate me from the only person who gives a damn." "Elsie," Gideon said quietly. "No." She turned to Morrison. "You want to know if he's good enough? Ask me about the time I got sick last winter with fever so bad I couldn't stand. Ask me how he rode 6 hours through a blizzard to get medicine. Ask me about how he sat up with me for 3 days straight, making sure I kept breathing." Her voice cracked. "Ask me what it's like to finally have someone who doesn't look at you like you're a burden." The room went silent. Morrison cleared his throat, shuffled the papers. "Well, I suppose that's clear enough." He pulled out a stamp and ink pad. "I'm granting the guardianship. Mr. Vale, this child is now legally your responsibility. Don't make me regret this decision." "I won't." Morrison stamped the papers with more force than necessary. "See that you don't." They walked out into the spring sunlight. Elsie was shaking, not from fear, from the adrenaline of standing up to a man with power and winning. "You okay?" Gideon asked. "Yeah." She took a breath. "Was I too harsh?" "You were perfect." "He made me mad. Talking like you weren't good enough, like I don't know what I've got." Gideon put a hand on her shoulder. "You did good, kid." They started toward the horses. That's when the voice called out from across the street. "Well, look at this. Mountain Man's got himself a little pet." Gideon recognized the speaker, Jack Donnelly, a logger who worked the camp south of town. Big man, stupid mean, the kind who looked for excuses to prove how tough he was. "Keep walking," Gideon said quietly to Elsie. But Donnelly was already crossing the street, 3 of his friends trailing behind. They stank of whiskey, even though it wasn't yet noon. "I asked you a question, Vale, that your little girl? She's none of your business." "Oh, I think she is. Whole town's been wondering what a man like you wants with a child. Can't be nothing good. Gideon felt the rage building in his chest. Hot, sharp, dangerous. Watch your mouth. Or what? You gonna hit me in front of your daughter? That the kind of man you are? He's the kind of man who saved me, Elsie said. She'd moved to stand beside Gideon, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. What kind are you? Donnelly laughed. Feisty little thing. Where'd you teach her that mouth, Vale? Last warning, Gideon said. Walk away. Make me. What happened next happened fast. Donnelly reached out like he was going to grab Elsie, maybe just to prove he could, maybe for something worse. Gideon's fist caught him in the throat before his hand got within a foot of her. Donnelly staggered back, choking. His friends moved in. Gideon caught the first one with an elbow to the face, felt the nose break under the impact. The second one got a knee to the gut that dropped him to the mud. The third one pulled a knife. Gideon! Elsie shouted. He turned just in time to catch the man's wrist, twisted it hard until the knife clattered to the ground. Then he drove his forehead into the man's face and felt teeth give way. Donnelly had recovered enough to charge. He hit Gideon like a bull, drove him back against the hitching post. Gideon's ribs screamed where the wood caught him. He brought his knee up hard into Donnelly's groin, followed it with a hook to the jaw that split his knuckles open. Donnelly went down. Gideon stood over him, breathing hard, his hands shaking with violence he'd kept buried for 2 years. You touch her, you look at her wrong, you even think about her, and I'll bury you so deep in the mountains nobody'll ever find the bones. We clear? Donnelly spit blood. You're crazy. That's the rumor. Sheriff Harding came running from the other end of the street, his hand on his gun. What in hell is going on here? Just having a conversation, Gideon said. His split knuckles dripped blood onto the mud. Harding looked at the 4 men on the ground, looked at Elsie, who was pale but standing tall, looked back at Gideon. This is the kind of conversation that needs to happen again? Hope not. Then I suggest you get out of town before it does. Harding's voice was tired. And Donnelly? You and your boys stay away from Vale and his daughter. I catch wind you're causing trouble. I'll run you out of the territory myself. Gideon took Elsie's hand and led her to the horses. His knuckles were on fire, his ribs aching where he'd hit the post. But none of that mattered as much as getting her away from town. They rode hard for the first hour, didn't speak until they were well into the high country. Finally, Elsie broke the silence. Are you okay? I'm fine. Your hand's bleeding. It'll keep. She was quiet. Then, you would have killed him if he'd touched me. It wasn't a question. Yes, Gideon said. Why? Because some things you don't allow, not ever. But you could have gone to jail, or worse. Worth it. She rode in silence for a while. When she spoke again, her voice was small. Nobody ever fought for me before. Get used to it. They reached the cabin as the sun was setting, painting the peaks orange and gold. Gideon's ribs hurt bad enough that he had trouble dismounting. Elsie saw him wince and insisted on taking care of the horses herself. Inside, she made him sit while she cleaned his knuckles with water from the creek. Her hands were gentle, careful. When she finished, she wrapped them in clean cloth torn from an old shirt. You need to be more careful, she said. I was careful. You fought 4 men. Only had to hit 3 of them. She almost smiled. Still, Elsie. He waited until she looked at him. I need you to understand something. Long as you're with me, nobody gets to hurt you. Nobody gets to threaten you. Nobody gets to make you feel small. That's the deal. What if it gets you killed? Then it gets me killed. That's stupid. Maybe, but it's the truth. She sat back on her heels, studying his face. You really mean that? Every word? Why? Because you matter. And people who matter are worth fighting for. Her eyes got shiny. She wiped at them quickly, angry at the tears. I hate when you say stuff like that. Why? Because it makes me feel things. And feeling things is scary. Gideon knew what she meant. Feeling things meant you had something to lose. And when you'd lost as much as they both had, caring about anything felt like handing the world a weapon to hurt you with. But it was also the only thing that made life worth living. That night, Elsie had the worst nightmare she'd had in months. Gideon woke to her screaming, climbed the ladder to find her thrashing in the blankets, her eyes wide with terror. Hey, hey, you're okay. He put his hands on her shoulders, careful not to grip too tight. Just a dream. She came awake gasping, sweat soaking her hair. He was here. Tommy was here, and he said you were just pretending, that you'd get tired of me and sell me to someone worse. That's not going to happen. You don't know that. Yes, I do. People change their minds. People get tired of things. Gideon sat down on the edge of the loft floor. His ribs protested, but he ignored them. You remember what we did today? The paperwork? She nodded. That means you're stuck with me now. Legal, official. There's no changing my mind because it's written down in the law. He touched her hand. You're my daughter now. Not because somebody sold you or because I felt sorry for you, because I chose you and you chose me back. And that's not something that goes away just because things get hard. What if I'm too much trouble? Then we'll figure it out together. What if I turn out bad? Then you'll still be mine. She was crying now, really crying, the kind of tears she'd been holding back for years. Gideon pulled her close and let her soak his shirt, his hand awkward on her back. He wasn't good at this comforting business. Didn't have the right words or the gentle touch, but he had patience, and he had time, and he had the sheer stubborn refusal to give up on her. Eventually her crying slowed. She pulled back, wiping her face. Sorry, she muttered. Don't be. I got your shirt all wet. I've got other shirts. She almost laughed. Then she said, Can you stay up here? Just until I fall asleep? Yeah, I can do that. He sat with his back against the wall while she settled back into the blankets. Outside, an owl called, low, mournful. The wind whispered through the pines. Inside, the cabin creaked and settled the way old buildings do. Gideon? Yeah? Thank you. For what? For being crazy enough to walk into that tavern. He was quiet. Then he said, Thank you for being brave enough to let me. She fell asleep a few minutes later. Gideon stayed where he was, watching her breathe, and thought about all the ways a life could change in a single moment. One decision, one choice, one refusal to look away. He'd been dying slowly in these mountains, letting the cold and the silence and the loneliness grind him down to nothing. And then this kid had shown up and reminded him what it felt like to be human. The summer brought different challenges. Gideon had to ride down to Black Ridge twice a month now to trade furs and pick up supplies. Each time he felt the eyes on him, curious, suspicious, judgmental. People whispered when he passed. A few brave souls asked questions he didn't bother answering. The worst was Mary Hutchins, a washerwoman with more opinions than sense. That girl should be in school, she announced one afternoon when Gideon was loading his horse. She should be around other children, learning proper things. She's learning plenty. Wilderness skills aren't proper education for a young lady. Good thing she's not trying to be a young lady then. Mary's face went red. You're going to ruin her. Mark my words, she'll grow up wild and unmarriageable. Being marriageable means ending up washing other people's drawers for pennies. I'll take wild. He rode away before Mary could sputter out a response. But her words stuck with him. Maybe Elsie should be around other kids. Maybe she should learn things he couldn't teach her. He knew tracking and trapping and survival. He didn't know history or grammar or whatever else kids were supposed to learn. That night he asked Elsie about it. You want to go to school? She looked up from the rabbit she was skinning. Why? Because there's things you might want to learn that I can't teach you. Like what? Reading more complicated books. Math beyond basic arithmetic. History. Do you know history? Some. Then teach me that. I'm not a teacher. You've taught me everything else. Gideon struggled to explain. There's a whole world out there beyond these mountains. Don't you want to know about it? Elsie set down her knife and wiped her hands on her pants. Gideon, I spent the first 6 years of my life being told I was stupid and worthless, that I'd never amount to anything, that I was just something to be used and thrown away. She looked at him steadily. You taught me I was wrong about all that. You taught me I could learn and grow and be strong. Why would I want to go sit in some schoolroom with kids who will just make fun of me when I've got that right here? Because you deserve more than just survival. This isn't just survival, this is living. She gestured around the cabin. This is the first place I've ever felt safe. The first place I've ever felt wanted. Why would I trade that for anything? He didn't have an answer, but 2 weeks later, Sheriff Harding rode up the mountain with news that made the decision for them. Truancy officers coming through next month, Harding said. He looked uncomfortable delivering the message. New territorial law. All children between 6 and 14 have to attend school at least 6 months out of the year. Gideon's hands clenched. And if they don't? Then the guardian gets fined, or worse, they can take the child away for neglect. That's horseshit. That's the law. Harding shifted in his saddle. Look, I don't like it either, but if you want to keep her legal, you need to comply. At least make it look like you're trying. After he left, Elsie came out from the cabin where she'd been listening. I'm not going, she said flatly. You might have to. Why? So some bureaucrat can feel like he's done his job? So I can sit in a room with kids who'll call me the girl who was sold? So they don't take you away from me. That stopped her. Fear flickered across her face. They can do that? According to Harding, yeah. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Fine, I'll go to their stupid school, but you have to promise me something. What? That no matter what happens there, no matter what people say or do, I can always come home to you. Always, Gideon said. The first day of school, Elsie threw up twice before they even left the cabin. I can't do this, she said, her face pale. You can. What if they hate me? Then they're idiots and their opinion doesn't matter. Easy for you to say. You don't have to sit in a room with them. Gideon knelt down so they were eye level. Listen to me. You've survived things that would break most adults. You've learned to hunt and track and survive in wilderness that kills grown men. You can handle a classroom full of kids. What if I can't? Then we'll figure out another way. But you have to try first. She nodded, still looking terrified. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of Black Ridge, a small building with peeling paint and crooked shutters. About 20 kids milled around outside, ranging from 6 to 14. They all stopped and stared when Gideon and Elsie rode up. The teacher, a thin woman named Miss Caroline Porter, came to greet them. She had kind eyes but a worried expression. Mr. Vale, Elsie, welcome. She's all yours, Gideon said. He looked at Elsie. I'll be back at 3 o'clock. Okay. Her voice was barely a whisper. He hated leaving her there, hated the way the other kids were already whispering, already judging, but he forced himself to turn the horse and ride away. The day dragged like a wounded animal. Gideon tried to work, checked his traps, split firewood, repaired a section of fence, but his mind kept drifting to Elsie, wondering if she was okay, imagining all the ways kids could be cruel. He was waiting outside the schoolhouse at 2:45. When the door opened and kids started spilling out, he searched for Elsie's face. Found her near the back, walking alone. Her jaw was set, her eyes hard. She climbed onto the horse without a word. They were halfway up the mountain before she spoke. I hate it. What happened? Nothing. Everything. They all stared at me like I was some kind of freak. At lunch, nobody would sit near me. And this one girl, Margaret Simmons, she whispered to her friend loud enough for everyone to hear that I was the girl whose father sold her for drinking money. Gideon's hands tightened on the reins. What did you do? Told her that at least I knew who my father was, which is more than she could say given how many men her mother entertains. Despite everything, Gideon almost smiled. How'd that go over? Miss Porter made me stand in the corner for an hour, said I needed to learn to control my tongue. Elsie's voice was bitter. But it was fine for Margaret to say what she said. That didn't count as cruel. Maybe tomorrow will be better. Or maybe I could just stay home and you could teach me like before. You know we can't do that. Why not? What's the point of learning their version of history and their version of arithmetic when none of them will even look at me like I'm human? Gideon didn't have a good answer. The weeks crawled by. Every morning, Elsie got up and went to school with the same grim determination she used for everything else. Every afternoon, she came home a little harder, a little more closed off. The breaking point came in October. Gideon was waiting outside the school when Elsie came out with blood on her lip and fire in her eyes. Behind her, Miss Porter held back a boy about 12 years old who was sporting a black eye and a split nose. What happened? Gideon demanded. We're going home, Elsie said. She climbed onto the horse. Elsie, now. He looked at Miss Porter. She shook her head slightly like she didn't want to explain in front of the other students. Gideon mounted up, and they rode out. At the cabin, Elsie finally told him. His name's Daniel Crenshaw. He's been making comments for weeks about you, about me, about what he thinks happens up here in the cabin. Her hand shook. Today he said you probably bought me because you wanted a wife you could train young. Rage exploded in Gideon's chest, so hot and sudden he could barely breathe. So I hit him, Elsie continued. Broke his nose. Would have done worse, but Miss Porter pulled me off. Did she hear what he said? She says it doesn't matter, that violence is never the answer, that I need to learn to ignore cruel words. Elsie looked at him with tears in her eyes. But I can't. I can't sit there and let them say those things about you when you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Gideon pulled her into a hug. I'm sorry. For what? For making you go there, for putting you through this. It's not your fault people are terrible. No, but I can do something about it. The next morning, Gideon rode into town alone and found Sheriff Harding at his office. I need to talk to the truancy officer, Gideon said. About what? About alternative arrangements for Elsie's education. There aren't any alternatives. She goes to school, or you get fined. Then find me. Harding sighed. Vale, I'm not sending her back there. Not to be tormented by kids who think it's their right to judge her. Not to sit in a room where the teacher values order over basic human decency. So what are you going to do? Teach her myself. And if the territory has a problem with that, they can come find me. Harding was quiet. Then he said, They'll come for her, you know. If you don't comply, they'll send someone to take her away. Let them try. The sheriff studied Gideon's face, saw the absolute conviction there. You'd fight them? The law? For her? Yeah, I would. Harding rubbed his face. You're going to get yourself killed or thrown in jail. Maybe, but at least I'll sleep at night. Word spread fast in Black Ridge. Within a week, everyone knew that the mountain man had pulled his daughter from school and dared the territory to do something about it. The truancy officer arrived on a cold November morning with 2 territorial marshals as backup. Gideon met them 50 yards from the cabin, rifle in hand. That's far enough, he called out. The truancy officer, a soft man in a suit that didn't fit the mountains, held up his hands. Mr. Vale, we're here on official business. Your daughter is required by law to attend school. She's being educated. I'm teaching her myself. You're not a certified teacher. Neither is Miss Porter. She's a shopkeeper's daughter who can barely read herself. One of the marshals shifted. Mr. Vale, we don't want trouble, but if you don't comply, we'll have to take the girl into custody. You'll try. There's 3 of us and 1 of you. 3 of you who've never spent a winter in these mountains. 3 of you who don't know these trails, don't know how to track, don't know how to survive when the temperature drops to 30 below. Gideon's voice was cold. You really want to start a fight you can't win? The men looked at each other, uncertain. Then Elsie stepped out of the cabin. She walked past Gideon and stood facing the 3 men, her chin up. I'm the one you want to talk to, she said. Not him. Young lady, My name is Elsie Vale. I'm 9 years old. I can read at a 6th grade level. I can do arithmetic through long division. I know the history of the territory, the names of all the presidents, and enough Latin to read medical texts. She stared at them. I also know how to hunt, track, survive in the wilderness, and fight if I have to. What exactly do you think your school is going to teach me that I don't already know? The truancy officer blinked. That's not the point. The law states I need an education. I'm getting one. Just because it doesn't look like what you think education should look like doesn't mean it's not valid. Nevertheless, if you try to take me from him, I'll run. I'll disappear into these mountains and you'll never find me. And if you hurt him trying to get to me, I'll make sure everyone knows that the territory thinks protecting children means separating them from the people who actually care about them. The 3 men stood there, completely at a loss. Finally, the truancy officer said, I'll have to report this. Report whatever you want, Elsie said. We're not leaving. They rode away looking defeated. Gideon turned to Elsie. That was either really brave or really stupid. Probably both. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off. Are they going to come back? Maybe, but we've got time to prepare if they do. They stood together watching the 3 men disappear down the trail, And Gideon realized something he should have known from the start. This girl didn't need protecting. She needed someone to stand beside her while she protected herself. And that he could do. The truancy officer never came back, but his report did. 2 months later, Sheriff Harding rode up through fresh snow carrying an official-looking envelope sealed with the territorial stamp. His face told Gideon everything he needed to know before he even opened it. "Court summons," Harding said. "Hearings in 3 weeks. They're reviewing your guardianship." Gideon stared at the paper. The words blurred together. Petition to terminate, unsuitable environment, failure to comply with educational requirements. On what grounds? Pick one. Keeping her out of school, living in isolation, the fight at the tavern last year. Harding dismounted, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Someone's been building a case against you. My money's on the Hutchins woman. She's been talking to anyone who'll listen about how you're ruining that girl. By teaching her to read, to survive, to stand up for herself? By keeping her away from civilization, by raising her wild." Harding pulled his coat tighter. "They're going to argue she needs a proper home, a mother, structure. She has a home. You know what I mean, Vale? A town home. A family that looks normal to people who don't know any better." Elsie appeared in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "What's going on?" Gideon folded the summons and shoved it in his pocket. "Nothing you need to worry about." "Don't lie to me. I heard what he said." She looked at Harding. "They're trying to take me away, aren't they?" The sheriff had the decency to look uncomfortable. "There's going to be a hearing, that's all I know for certain. And if they decide Gideon's not fit, then the court will place you with someone they think is more appropriate." "Someone like who? The Hutchins family? The Porters?" Her voice rose. "People who think being appropriate means being quiet and obedient and ashamed of where you came from." "Elsie," Gideon started. "No, they don't get to do this. They don't get to decide I'm better off somewhere else when they don't know anything about my life." Harding held up his hands. "I'm just the messenger. You want to fight this? You show up to the hearing and you make your case." He climbed back on his horse. "But Vale, you better bring more than your fists. This is about law and perception, and right now perception's not on your side." After he left, Elsie turned to Gideon with fire in her eyes. "We're not letting them win. We don't have much choice." "There's always a choice. You taught me that." She grabbed the summons from his pocket and read it, her jaw clenching tighter with every line. "Unsuitable environment. That's horseshit. This cabin's more of a home than any of those fancy houses in town. Language. I learned it from you." She looked up at him. "What do we do?" Gideon had been in plenty of fights. Bar brawls, bear attacks, men with knives and guns who wanted him dead for one reason or another. But this was different. This was fighting with words and laws and systems designed to protect people who didn't need protecting while ignoring the ones who did. "We prepare," he said finally. "We gather evidence that you're getting a good education. We find people willing to speak on our behalf. We show them you're better off here than anywhere else. Who's going to speak for us? Everyone in town thinks you're crazy. Maybe crazy's what we need." The next 3 weeks were the longest of Gideon's life. He rode down to Black Ridge 5 times, trying to find anyone willing to testify. Most people avoided him like he carried plague. The few who'd listened shook their heads and offered sympathy, but no help. Nobody wanted to go against the territorial authorities. Nobody wanted to risk being associated with the mountain man and his questionable arrangements. On the 6th trip, Gideon found an unexpected ally. Miss Porter was sweeping the schoolhouse steps when he approached. She saw him coming and stopped, her hands tightening on the broom handle. "Mr. Vale." "Miss Porter, got a minute?" She glanced around like she was checking for witnesses. "I suppose." "I need someone to testify that Elsie's being educated, someone with teaching credentials who can vouch for her knowledge." "You're asking me to help you keep her out of my school?" "I'm asking you to tell the truth. You've seen what she knows. You've heard her speak. You know she's getting an education." Miss Porter set the broom aside and crossed her arms. "Mr. Vale, I'm not going to pretend I agree with your methods. Children need socialization. They need peers. They need... What Elsie needs is to not be tormented by kids who think her past defines her worth. She needs to learn that the world isn't always kind, that sometimes you have to endure difficult situations. She's been enduring difficult situations since the day she was born. Gideon's voice was rough. I'm not asking you to approve of how I'm raising her. I'm asking you to acknowledge that she's smart, capable, and better educated than half the kids in your classroom. Miss Porter was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "That boy she hit, Daniel Crenshaw. Do you know what happened after that incident?" "She broke his nose." "Before that, do you know what he said to her?" "She told me." "Did she tell you that I heard him? That I was standing 10 feet away when he made those vile suggestions about your relationship with her?" Gideon went still. "She said you didn't hear." "I heard, and I did nothing." Miss Porter's voice cracked. "I should have defended her. I should have sent Daniel home with a note to his parents about his disgusting behavior. Instead, I punished Elsie for defending herself because it was easier than confronting the real problem." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I owe her an apology. And because you're right, she doesn't belong in my classroom. Not because she's not smart enough, but because I'm not brave enough to protect her the way she deserves." Miss Porter met his eyes. "I'll testify. I'll tell them she's receiving an excellent education, and I'll tell them why I think she's better off with you than in my school." It was the first piece of good news Gideon had received in weeks. The second came from an even more unlikely source. He was leaving the general store when a voice called out behind him. "Vale, wait!" Gideon turned. Jack Donnelly stood there, his face still bearing faint scars from their fight months earlier. "What do you want?" "To apologize." Donnelly looked uncomfortable. "For what I said, about you and the girl. It was out of line." "It was. I was drunk. Not that that's an excuse." "It's not." Donnelly shifted his weight. "I heard about the hearing, about them trying to take her from you." "So? So I wanted you to know, if you need someone to testify that you're not what they're saying you are, I'll do it." Gideon stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because I saw your face that day when I made those accusations. Saw how ready you were to kill me for even suggesting something like that. A man with bad intentions doesn't react that way. A man with bad intentions makes excuses or deflects." Donnelly rubbed his jaw where Gideon had hit him. "You were ready to die protecting her honor. That told me everything I needed to know about what kind of man you really are. You could have told people that any time in the last 6 months." "Yeah, well, I'm not always smart about doing the right thing, but I'm trying to do better." He held out his hand. "Let me help." Gideon looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then he shook it. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm not exactly a character witness most people trust." "Neither am I. Maybe that's why it'll work." Back at the cabin, Gideon found Elsie practicing with her rifle. She'd set up targets at 50, 75, and 100 yards. All three had bullet holes dead center. "You're wasting ammunition," Gideon said. "I'm preparing." "For what?" "For whatever comes next." She reloaded, sighted, fired. Another dead center shot. "If they take me away, I'm going to run. And when I do, I need to be able to hunt for myself." "It's not going to come to that." "You don't know that." She lowered the rifle and looked at him. "I've been thinking about what I'll say. At the hearing." "You don't have to say anything. I'll handle it." "They're going to ask me questions. About you. About us. About whether I want to stay." Her jaw set. "And I'm going to tell them the truth." "Which is, that you saved my life. That every day I spend with you makes me stronger and smarter and more capable. That I love you more than I've ever loved anyone because you're the first person who loved me back." Her voice cracked. "And that if they take me from you, they'll have to drag me kicking and screaming because I'll never go willingly." Gideon's throat closed up. He'd heard her call him by name 1,000 times, heard her laugh and argue and swear. But he'd never heard her say she loved him out loud. The words hit harder than any punch he'd ever taken. "Elsie, I mean it. Every word." She wiped her eyes angrily. "So you better be ready to fight for me because I'm sure as hell going to fight for you." The day of the hearing arrived cold and gray, with snow threatening in the clouds. Gideon wore the only decent clothes he owned, a shirt without holes, pants that weren't stained with blood or dirt, his good boots. He'd even trimmed his beard. Elsie had put on the dress Miss Porter had given her, simple blue cotton that actually fit. She hated it, kept tugging at the collar like it was strangling her. I look stupid, she muttered as they rode toward town. You look fine. I look like someone I'm not. You look like someone who's taking this seriously. I am taking it seriously. That's why I should be wearing my regular clothes. The ones I actually wear when I'm living my actual life. Elsie, they're going to judge me no matter what I wear. Might as well be comfortable. She had a point. But Gideon had learned enough about the law to know that sometimes you had to play the game even when the rules were rigged against you. The hearing was held in the town hall, a drafty building that served as courthouse, meeting space, and occasional dance hall. By the time Gideon and Elsie arrived, the benches were packed. Seemed like half of Black Ridge had turned out to watch the spectacle. Judge Morrison sat at the front, looking grim. Beside him sat a woman Gideon didn't recognize, thin, prim, wearing spectacles and a permanent expression of disapproval. The court-appointed social investigator, probably. The one who'd decided his cabin wasn't fit for a child without ever setting foot in it. On the other side sat Mary Hutchins and 3 of her friends, all wearing matching expressions of righteous satisfaction. All rise for the Honorable Judge Morrison, the clerk called out. Everyone stood. Morrison banged his gavel once. We're here to review the guardianship arrangement between Gideon Vale and the minor child Elsie Vale. The petitioners claim the current arrangement is unsuitable and request the child be placed in a more appropriate home. Morrison looked at the social investigator. Mrs. Pemberton, your report? Mrs. Pemberton stood, consulting her notes. After careful review, I've determined that Mr. Vale's home situation is inadequate for raising a young girl. He lives in a single-room cabin miles from town with no female presence to provide proper guidance. The child has been withdrawn from school and is being educated by a man with no teaching credentials. She's exposed to violence. Mr. Vale has been involved in multiple altercations and is being raised in an environment that emphasizes survival skills over social graces and academic learning. Have you visited the home? Morrison asked. That wasn't necessary. The facts speak for themselves. Elsie's hand found Gideon's under the table. He squeezed it gently. Mr. Vale, Morrison said, you want to respond to these allegations? Gideon stood. Public speaking had never been his strength, but he forced the words out. Mrs. Pemberton's right about some things. I live in a cabin. It's got 1 room. There's no woman there because it's just me and Elsie. And yeah, I've been in fights, always defending her or myself. That doesn't exactly help your case, Morrison said dryly. Let me finish. What Mrs. Pemberton doesn't mention is that the cabin's solid, warm, and safe. That Elsie can read better than most adults in this room. That she knows mathematics, history, science, and practical skills that'll keep her alive when theory fails. That she's healthy and strong, and growing up knowing she's valued. Skills like shooting? Mrs. Pemberton interrupted. Like tracking and trapping. Those aren't appropriate for a young lady. Why not? Elsie's voice rang out before Gideon could stop her. Morrison frowned. Young lady, you'll have a chance to speak. No, I want to know. Elsie stood up. Why aren't those skills appropriate? Because I'm a girl? Because learning to take care of myself makes me less marriageable, or whatever nonsense you think matters? Elsie, Gideon said quietly. She ignored him. You want to talk about appropriate? Let's talk about what was appropriate before Gideon. Let's talk about being 6 years old and being sold in a tavern because my own father thought I was worth less than a bottle of whiskey. Let's talk about the bruises and the hunger and the nights I spent praying someone would just notice I existed. The room had gone dead silent. Then let's talk about after, Elsie continued, her voice shaking with emotion. Let's talk about learning to read by firelight, about tracking deer through snow and understanding that every animal deserves respect, about having someone teach me that I'm capable and strong and worthy of taking up space in this world. She turned to Mrs. Pemberton. You think his cabin isn't appropriate? I think your perfect town homes with their perfect families who ignore children being abused right under their noses aren't appropriate. At least Gideon was willing to do something when everyone else looked away. Miss Vale, Mrs. Pemberton started. I'm not finished. You want to place me somewhere more suitable? Fine. Find me someone who'll teach me to survive. Find me someone who'll fight 4 men to protect my honor. Find me someone who'll ride through a blizzard to get medicine when I'm sick. Find me someone who sees me as a person instead of a problem. Her voice broke. Find me someone who loves me like Gideon does. And if you can't do that, then maybe you should admit this hearing is about making yourselves feel better, not about what's actually best for me. She sat down hard, her face flushed. Morrison stared at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I think we'll hear from the witnesses now." Miss Porter testified first, describing Elsie's academic abilities in detail. She admitted that Elsie was ahead of most students her age in reading and mathematics, and that while her educational methods were unconventional, they were clearly effective. Then came the surprise. "I'd also like to address the incident that led to Elsie's withdrawal from school," Miss Porter said. "I failed her as a teacher. I allowed another student to make vile, sexually inappropriate comments about her relationship with her guardian, and when she defended herself physically, I punished her instead of the boy who'd actually committed the offense." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. "I was a coward. I chose order over justice. And if Elsie had remained in my school, I would have failed her again because I'm not brave enough to stand up to parents and community members who think certain children deserve abuse." Mary Hutchins' face went purple. "That's a lie. Miss Porter, It's the truth," Miss Porter said, "and it's my testimony." Jack Donnelly went next. His testimony was simple and direct. He'd accused Gideon of terrible things. Gideon had responded with violence to protect Elsie's honor, and that violent response had convinced Donnelly that his accusations were completely unfounded. "A guilty man deflects," Donnelly said. "An innocent man fights. Vale was ready to kill me. That told me everything about his character and his relationship with that girl. It's pure, protective, exactly what a father should be." Sheriff Harding testified about Gideon's cooperation with the law, his lack of criminal record beyond the fights defending Elsie, and his observation that the child appeared healthy, well cared for, and genuinely happy. "I've seen a lot of bad situations in my years as sheriff," Harding said. "Children neglected, abused, abandoned. This isn't one of them. This is a man doing his best to raise a child in difficult circumstances. Maybe it doesn't look traditional, but it's working." Finally, Morrison asked Elsie to approach. She walked to the front, her head high despite the trembling in her legs. "Miss Vale," Morrison said gently, "I'm going to ask you some questions. I want honest answers. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Are you afraid of Mr. Vale?" "No, sir." "Has he ever hurt you, hit you, touched you inappropriately?" "Never." "Do you want to stay with him?" "More than anything." "Why?" Elsie took a breath. "Because he's my father. Not the man who sold me. He was never my father. Gideon is. He's the one who chose me when nobody else would. He's the one who taught me I was worth something. He's the one who makes me feel safe and loved and like I belong somewhere." She looked directly at Morrison. "You want to know if I'm better off with him? Ask me who I'd trust to protect me if something bad happened. Ask me who I'd want beside me if I was lost or scared or hurt. Ask me who I want to become when I grow up." And the answer is someone like Gideon. Someone brave enough to do the right thing even when it's hard. Morrison was quiet. Then he said, "One more question. If this court decides you should be placed elsewhere, what will you do?" Elsie didn't hesitate. "I'll run. I'll disappear into the mountains and you'll never find me, and I'll survive because Gideon taught me how." That's not an advisable course of action. Neither is separating a child from the only stable home she's ever known. But here we are. Morrison's lips twitched like he might smile. "You may return to your seat." The judge shuffled through papers, his expression unreadable. The room held its collective breath. Finally, Morrison spoke. "I've heard enough. Mrs. Pemberton, your concerns about conventional education and female role models are noted. However, this court's primary obligation is to the welfare of the child, not to social conventions." He looked at Gideon. "Mr. Vale, your methods are unorthodox. Your living situation is unconventional. Under normal circumstances, I might have concerns." Gideon's heart sank. "However," Morrison continued, "these are not normal circumstances. This child was failed by every conventional institution meant to protect her. She was neglected, sold, and treated as disposable. You intervened when no one else would. You provided safety, stability, and education. The result is a capable, articulate, strong-willed young woman who clearly understands her own best interests." He banged his gavel. The petition to terminate guardianship is denied. Mr. Vale retains full legal custody of Elsie Vale, with the following conditions. The child must continue to receive education, which can be provided by Mr. Vale or other qualified individuals. Sheriff Harding will conduct quarterly visits to ensure the child's well-being, and Mr. Vale will make reasonable efforts to avoid violent altercations. Relief hit Gideon so hard his knees nearly buckled. Furthermore, Morrison said, his voice stern, I'm formally advising Mrs. Hutchins and others who may feel compelled to interfere in this family's business. Unless you have evidence of actual abuse or neglect, leave them alone. This court has made its decision. Any future petitions of this nature will be viewed with extreme skepticism. He banged the gavel again. We're adjourned. The room erupted in whispers. Mary Hutchins stormed out, her friends trailing behind. Mrs. Pemberton gathered her papers with pursed lips. Elsie grabbed Gideon's hand. We won. Yeah. His voice was rough. We did. I told you we would. You did. She threw her arms around him in front of the whole courtroom, not caring who saw. Gideon hugged her back, his eyes burning. Outside, Miss Porter caught up with them. Mr. Vale? Elsie? I meant what I said in there. I'm sorry I failed you. You didn't fail me today, Elsie said. Today you stood up. That counts for something. Miss Porter's eyes got shiny. Thank you. She looked at Gideon. If you ever need books or teaching materials, let me know. I'll help however I can. After she left, Donnelly approached, looking uncomfortable. Guess this means you're stuck with her, he said. Guess so. For what it's worth, Vale, you're doing good. Better than most. He tipped his hat to Elsie. You take care of your old man, you hear? He's too stubborn to take care of himself. I know, Elsie said. They rode back to the mountain in silence, but it was the good kind of silence. The kind that comes after a battle when you're too tired to talk, but too relieved to care. At the cabin, Gideon built up the fire while Elsie changed out of the hated dress and back into her comfortable clothes. I was scared, she admitted later, sitting by the fire with a cup of tea. I thought Morrison might rule against us. Me too. What would you have done? If he had? Whatever I had to. Even run? Even that. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, Gideon, can I ask you something? Always. When did you start thinking of me as your daughter? Not just a kid you were helping, but actually yours? He thought about it. Probably that first night, when you asked what was going to happen and I realized I'd fight anyone who tried to hurt you. That's when I knew. I didn't start thinking of you as my father until later, Elsie said. Maybe 3 or 4 months in, when I realized you weren't going to change, that you were just steady, always there. Always keeping your promises. She looked at him. That's when I knew I was home. You are home, Gideon said, for as long as you want to be. What about when I grow up? When I'm old enough to leave? Then you leave, and you come back to visit. And this cabin will always be here waiting for you. Promise? Promise. She smiled and settled back against the wall, watching the fire. Outside, the first snow of the evening began to fall. Soft and silent. They'd won. Against the law, against social conventions, against everyone who thought they knew better. They'd won because they'd fought for each other. Because they'd refused to accept that love had to look a certain way or fit a certain mold. And sitting there in the firelight, 2 people who'd both been abandoned by the world they'd been born into had built something stronger than blood or law or tradition. They'd built a family. The years after the hearing brought changes neither of them expected. Elsie turned 10, then 11, then 12. She shot up in height, all gangly limbs and sharp angles. Her face lost its childish roundness. She could outshoot Gideon now, could track better, could read the weather with an accuracy that sometimes unnerved him. But the changes weren't just physical. She started asking questions he didn't know how to answer. Questions about her mother, about the men who might have been her father, about Tommy Brennan and what happened to people like him who threw away the things that mattered. Do you ever wonder where she is? Elsie asked one spring morning. They were checking traps along the high ridge, the sun just breaking over the peaks. Who? My mother. She didn't look at him, kept her eyes on the trail. If she's alive, if she ever thinks about me. Gideon pulled up short. They didn't talk about Elsie's mother, hadn't in years. Why are you asking? Because I'm old enough now to understand that she had choices. She could have stayed, could have fought for me, could have been better. Elsie's jaw clenched. But she wasn't. And I want to know if you think people like that ever feel guilty about what they've done. Some do, most don't. Which one was she? I don't know, never met her. Elsie was quiet for a long stretch. Then she said, I hate her sometimes. For leaving. For making me feel like I was the problem. You weren't the problem. You were never the problem. Then why did everyone act like I was? My mother, Tommy, even the people in town who looked at me like I was something dirty. Gideon stopped walking and turned to face her. Because people are cowards. They'd rather blame a child than admit the adults failed. It's easier to say you were unwanted than to acknowledge they were incapable of wanting anything beyond themselves. That's a fancy way of saying they were selfish bastards. Language. You say it all the time. I'm allowed. I'm old. She almost smiled, but it faded quickly. Gideon? Do you think I'll end up like her, like them? No. How do you know? Because you already made different choices. You chose to trust me when you had every reason not to. You chose to fight for yourself instead of giving up. You chose to become someone strong instead of someone bitter. He touched her shoulder. You're nothing like them, and you never will be. The certainty in his voice seemed to settle something in her. She nodded, and they continued up the trail. But the question lingered in Gideon's mind. What would happen when Elsie got older? When she started wanting things beyond the mountain? When she realized the world was bigger than their cabin and the life they'd built together? The answer came sooner than he expected. It started with the books. Miss Porter had been sending them supplies for years now. Textbooks on history and mathematics, novels that Elsie devoured in single sittings, scientific journals that Gideon barely understood. Elsie read everything, her appetite for knowledge growing faster than Gideon could feed it. One evening, she looked up from a book about medicine and said, "Did you know you can set a broken bone wrong and it'll heal crooked? But if you set it right, it's almost as strong as it was before?" Makes sense. I want to learn how to do that, how to fix things, people things. You mean be a doctor? Maybe, or a nurse, something where I can help. She closed the book and looked at him. There's a family 2 valleys over, the Hendersons. Their youngest boy fell out of a tree last week and broke his arm. Mrs. Henderson didn't know how to set it properly. By the time they got to town, it had started healing wrong. How do you know this? Sheriff Harding mentioned it when he came by last month. Said the boy might lose use of the arm. Gideon saw where this was going. Elsie, I could have helped, if I'd known, if I'd been there. Her hands clenched on the book. There's people up here in the high country who can't get to town when they're hurt or sick. They just suffer through it or die. And I could do something about that if I learned how. That's a big responsibility. So is raising a kid nobody wanted. You took that on anyway. She had him there. The next day, Gideon rode down to Black Ridge and found Doc Harrison, the town's only physician. Harrison was 70 if he was a day, with hands that shook from age and probably too much whiskey, but he knew his trade. I need a favor, Gideon said. Harrison looked up from the medical journal he was reading. Vale, what brings you to civilization? My daughter wants to learn medicine. How old is she now? 12? 13 next month. Bit young for medical training. She's smart, reads at an adult level, learns fast. Gideon hesitated. I'm not asking for formal training, just if you had books you could spare, supplies, maybe answer questions if she wrote to you. Harrison studied him over his spectacles. Why medicine? Because she wants to help people, because she's seen enough suffering to know it matters. Most girls her age want to learn sewing or cooking. She's not most girls. Harrison laughed, a dry sound like wind through dead leaves. No, I suppose she's not. He stood and walked to a cabinet, pulled out 3 heavy medical texts. These are mine from school. I don't use them anymore. Everything's up here now. He tapped his head. Your girl can have them. If she has questions, she can write. I'll answer when I can. What do I owe you? Nothing. Consider it an investment in the future. I'm not getting any younger, and this town could use someone with actual medical knowledge after I'm gone. Gideon carried the books back up the mountain like they were made of gold. Elsie's face, when she saw them, was worth every dollar he didn't have to spend. She threw herself into learning with a ferocity that reminded Gideon of how she'd approached everything else in her life, absolutely, completely, without reservation. She read the textbooks cover to cover, took notes in a careful hand, practiced anatomy on the rabbits and deer they hunted. "Look at this," she said one evening, showing him a diagram of the human heart. "It's like a pump. 4 chambers, all working together to push blood through the whole body. Isn't that amazing? If you say so." "You don't think it's amazing that we're walking around with this complicated machine inside us, keeping us alive?" "I try not to think too hard about what's keeping me alive. Makes me nervous." She laughed and went back to her books. But the studying led to action. Word got around the high country that Gideon Vale's daughter knew medicine. The first person to show up was a logger named Frank Peterson, with a gash on his arm from a slipped axe. He was embarrassed, apologetic, but desperate. "Doc Harrison's 3 days away, and this is getting infected," he said. "Heard your girl might be able to help." Elsie looked at the wound, then at Gideon. He saw the fear in her eyes. What if she made it worse? What if she hurt him? "You can do this," Gideon said quietly. "Trust yourself." She took a breath and got to work. She cleaned the wound with alcohol, irrigated it with boiled water, stitched it closed with thread she'd sterilized over the fire. Her hands shook, but they stayed steady enough. When she finished, she wrapped it in clean cloth and gave Peterson instructions on keeping it clean. "Come back in 3 days," she said. "I need to check it's healing right." Peterson did come back. The wound was clean, no signs of infection. He paid her with a smoked ham and told everyone he knew about the mountain girl who could stitch you up better than Doc Harrison. After that, people started coming regularly. A woman with a baby who wouldn't stop crying. Turned out the baby had an ear infection that Elsie recognized from her books and treated with warm compresses and advice to see Doc Harrison if it got worse. A man with a tooth so rotten it was killing him, Elsie pulled it with pliers she'd sterilized and packed the socket with gauze soaked in whiskey. A child with a fever who turned out to have pneumonia. Elsie couldn't treat that herself, but she recognized the symptoms fast enough to get the family moving toward town before it turned fatal. She saved lives. At 13 years old, with no formal training, just books and determination and a willingness to try. Gideon watched her become something he'd never expected. A healer. Someone people trusted. Someone who mattered to the community she'd once been rejected by. But with that recognition came new complications. One afternoon, a rider came up the trail at a gallop. Gideon grabbed his rifle by instinct, but the man's face was panicked, not threatening. "Please!" the man gasped. "My wife. She's having the baby, but something's wrong. She's bleeding too much. Doc Harrison's out of town, and I don't know what to do." Elsie appeared in the doorway. "How long has she been in labor?" 8 hours, maybe more." "Is the baby coming?" "I don't know. The man's voice broke. "Please, she's going to die." Elsie looked at Gideon. He saw the terror in her eyes. This was beyond anything she'd dealt with, beyond anything in her books. "You don't have to do this," Gideon said quietly. "If I don't, she dies. If you do and it goes wrong, you'll carry that forever. And if I don't try, I'll carry that too." She grabbed her medical kit, a leather bag they'd put together over the past year with supplies and instruments. "Let's go." They rode hard, reaching the cabin in the valley just as the sun was setting. Inside, a woman named Clara Morrison lay on a bed soaked with blood. Too much blood. She was barely conscious, her skin the color of old paper. Elsie's hand started shaking. "Talk to me," Gideon said. "What do you need?" "I need her not to be dying." Elsie's voice cracked. "I need this to be something simple that I know how to fix. I need—" "Elsie, focus. What do the books say?" She took a breath, forced herself to think. Postpartum hemorrhage. Could be retained placenta. Could be uterine atony. Could be... She stopped. "I need to examine her. I need to find out what's causing the bleeding." What followed was the longest hour of Gideon's life. He boiled water, held Clara's hand, kept her husband from falling apart completely. All while Elsie worked with a concentration that was almost frightening in its intensity. She found the problem, a piece of placenta that hadn't delivered, causing the uterus to bleed uncontrollably. She removed it carefully, her young hands steadier than they had any right to be. Then she used techniques from her books to help the uterus contract, to slow the bleeding. It worked. Slowly, gradually, Clara's color started returning. The bleeding slowed to normal. The baby, a healthy boy, nursed while his mother slept. Elsie walked outside and threw up behind the cabin. Gideon found her there, shaking, her hands still stained with blood. "I almost killed her," Elsie whispered. "But you didn't." "I could have. If I'd made one wrong move, if I'd missed something." "But you didn't," Gideon repeated. He pulled her close. "You saved her. You saved both of them." "I was so scared." "Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave. It means you knew what was at stake and you tried anyway." She cried then, really cried. The kind of tears that come from realizing how much responsibility you've just taken on, how much power you have to help or harm. When they rode back to their cabin the next morning, Elsie was quiet. "I want to do more," she said finally. "I want to learn more. I want to be good enough that I never have to be that scared again." "You're already good." "I'm adequate. There's a difference." She looked at him. "Doc Harrison said he'd teach me more if I asked. Maybe I should spend some time in town, learning from him properly." The words hit Gideon like a fist. Town. Away from the mountain. Away from him. But he said, "If that's what you want, I don't want to leave you." "I know. But I need to do this for me, for the people who need help." "I know that too." They rode in silence for a while. Then Elsie said, "Would you be okay if I was gone during the day?" Would he? Gideon had gotten used to her presence. The cabin felt empty when she wasn't there. But that was his problem, not hers. "I'd manage," he said. "You're lying." "I'd manage eventually." She smiled a little. "I don't have to go. Not if you need me here." "I don't need you here. I want you here. There's a difference." He looked at her. "And what I want doesn't matter as much as what you need." "Since when?" "Since you became old enough to know what you need." So Elsie started spending 3 days a week in town, learning from Doc Harrison. She'd ride down on Monday mornings and come back Wednesday evenings, her head full of new knowledge and her bag full of supplies. Gideon hated it, not because he didn't want her to learn, not because he wasn't proud of her, but because the cabin felt like a tomb when she was gone. Too quiet, too empty. Too much like it had been before she came into his life. He tried to stay busy, checked traps, cut wood, repaired things that didn't need repairing, but the silence ate at him. On the 3rd week, he was sitting by the fire when he heard hooves outside. His heart jumped. Elsie was back early. But when he opened the door, it wasn't Elsie. It was a dog. The animal was half-starved, its ribs showing through matted fur. It had a rope around its neck, frayed like it had been tied up and abandoned. It stared at Gideon with desperate eyes. "Go on," Gideon said. "Get out of here." The dog didn't move. "I said get." The dog lay down. Gideon sighed and went inside, got some dried meat and brought it out. The dog ate like it hadn't seen food in days, which it probably hadn't. "This doesn't mean you're staying," Gideon told it. The dog settled down on the porch like it had found home. When Elsie came back 2 days later, the dog was still there. Gideon had given up trying to chase it off. "You got a dog," Elsie said, grinning. "It got me." "What's its name?" "Doesn't have one. It's not staying." "Looks pretty comfortable for not staying." The dog, a mutt that was part something large and part something else equally unclear, had indeed made itself comfortable. It had already figured out where Gideon kept the food and which spot by the fire was warmest. "Fine," Gideon said. "It can stay until it decides to leave." "That's what you said about me." "That's different." "How?" He couldn't answer that. The dog stayed. They named it Bear because it was big and clumsy and seemed to think it owned the mountain. It followed Gideon on his trap lines, slept across the doorway at night like a guard, and howled mournfully whenever Elsie left for town. "He misses you when you're gone," Gideon said one evening. "Just him?" Elsie asked. "Maybe me too. A little." "A little?" "A lot." "Happy?" She smiled. "Yeah." But the absences continued, and Gideon learned to live with them the same way he learned to live with everything else, by enduring, by adapting, by accepting that the people you love sometimes need to be somewhere else. The hardest lesson came the following spring. Elsie was 15 now, tall and lean, and so competent it sometimes scared him. She could deliver a baby, set a bone, diagnose illnesses that would have baffled him. She spent 4 days a week in town now, helping Doc Harrison with his practice. One evening, she came home looking troubled. "Tommy Brennan's dying," she said. Gideon went still. "What?" "He showed up at Doc Harrison's office today. Liver failure. Years of drinking finally caught up with him." She set down her bag. "He's got maybe 2 weeks." "Good." "Gideon, what do you want me to say? That I'm sorry?" "I'm not. He sold you like you were nothing. He deserves whatever he gets." "I know." Elsie sat down heavily. "But he asked for me. Said he wanted to talk before he died." "No." "I didn't say I was going." "You're thinking about it." She looked at him. "Aren't you curious? What he'd say? Why he did what he did?" "No." "I am." Gideon felt something cold settle in his chest. "Why?" "Because I need to understand. I need to hear him admit that what he did was wrong. I need—" She stopped. "I need to know if he ever felt guilty, if he ever wished he'd made different choices. And if he didn't, if he's the same worthless drunk he always was, then at least I'll know. And I can stop wondering." Gideon understood the feeling. He'd spent years wondering about his father, about whether the old man had ever regretted driving Mary to the river. The not knowing had eaten at him more than the knowing could have. "You want me to come with you?" he asked. "Would you?" "I'd rather face down a grizzly, but yeah, I'll come." They found Tommy Brennan in a back room of Doc Harrison's office, lying on a cot that smelled like death and medicine. He'd shrunk since Gideon last saw him, wasted away to nothing, his skin yellow from jaundice, his hands shaking with tremors he couldn't control. He looked up when they entered, and his eyes fixed on Elsie. "You came," he rasped. "Yeah. You got big. You look—" He coughed, a wet sound. "You look healthy." "I am." Brennan's eyes shifted to Gideon. "You, the mountain man, Gideon Vale." "Right. The crazy bastard who paid $60 for a kid." Brennan laughed, which turned into more coughing. "Guess it worked out for you." "It did." "She turn out good?" "Better than good." Brennan looked back at Elsie. "That why you're here? To show me what I missed out on?" "I'm here because you asked for me," Elsie said. "I'm here because I have questions." "Ask." "Why'd you do it? Why'd you sell me?" Brennan was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because I was drunk and broke and you reminded me of everything I'd lost. Your mama, my self-respect, whatever chance I had at being something better than I was. So you blamed a 6-year-old child." "I blamed everyone. You, her, the world, myself, when I was sober enough to think about it." He coughed again. "Truth is, I was never fit to take care of you. Never wanted to. I took you in because people were watching and it would have looked bad if I didn't, but I hated every minute of it." Elsie's hands clenched. "Did you ever love me? Even a little?" "No." The word hung in the air like poison. "Did you ever feel guilty about what you did?" Brennan thought about it. "Sometimes, when I was drunk enough that the memories came back. I'd think about that night in the tavern and wonder what happened to you, if you were alive, if you hated me. I did hate you, for years. And now?" Elsie looked at him, really looked at this dying, broken man who'd once had complete power over her life. "Now I just feel sorry for you," she said, "because you had a chance to be something good, to care about someone other than yourself. And you threw it away for a bottle of whiskey." "Yeah," Brennan said. "I did." "Was it worth it?" He started to answer, then stopped, looked at her with eyes that held something that might have been regret or might have just been pain. "No," he said finally. "It wasn't." They left him there to die alone. Neither of them said a word until they were outside in the spring air. "You okay?" Gideon asked. "I don't know." Elsie's voice was shaky. "I thought hearing him admit it would make me feel better, but it just makes me sad." "Why?" "Because he wasted his whole life, because he could have changed and chose not to, because he's dying alone and it didn't have to be that way." Gideon put his arm around her shoulders. "That's not your fault." "I know. but it still hurts. Tommy Brennan died 3 days later. Nobody came to his funeral except the preacher who'd been paid to say some words. Elsie didn't go, said she'd already said goodbye. But that night she asked Gideon a question that kept him awake for hours afterward. Do you think I'm capable of that? Of becoming like him? No. How do you know? Because you've already made different choices. You chose to care about people, to help them, to become someone who builds things instead of destroying them. But the anger's still there sometimes. When I think about what he did, what she did, all the people who looked away. Anger's not the problem. Everyone gets angry. It's what you do with it that matters. He looked at her. You turned yours into medicine, into helping people. That's not what broken people do. She was quiet for a while, then she said, when I was little, I used to think that if I was just good enough, someone would love me. Someone would want to keep me. And now? Now I know that being good enough was never the problem. The problem was them. They were broken long before I came along. She looked at him. You taught me that. You taught me I was worth keeping just by keeping me. Gideon felt his throat close up. You made it easy. Liar, I was a mess. You were a kid who'd been through hell. That's different. She smiled and leaned against his shoulder. Bear lifted his head from where he'd been sleeping by the fire, saw they were okay, and went back to sleep. Outside, the spring wind whispered through the pines. Inside, a family sat together in comfortable silence, and for the first time in her life, Elsie understood that she hadn't been saved from her old life. She'd been given the chance to build a new one, and that made all the difference. The changes came gradually, the way seasons shift in the mountains, so subtle you don't notice until you're already living in a different world. Elsie turned 16 in March, and Gideon marked the occasion by teaching her to track mountain lion. They spent 3 days in the high country following prints through melting snow, learning to read the signs of a predator moving through its territory. On the third day, they found the cat sunning itself on a rock ledge, magnificent and deadly. Beautiful, isn't it? Elsie whispered. Dangerous. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Gideon looked at her, this young woman who could heal the sick and track apex predators with equal skill, and realized she was right. Some of the most beautiful things in the world were also the most dangerous. Love, trust, hope. All of them could destroy you if you weren't careful, but they could also save you. That night, sitting by their campfire under stars so bright they hurt to look at, Elsie said something that changed everything. I want to go to nursing school. Gideon had been poking at the fire with a stick. He stopped. Where? Denver. There's a program Doc Harrison told me about. 2 years of training. I could come back certified, able to do more than just patch people up and hope for the best. Denver's 300 miles away. I know. You'd be gone for 2 years. I know that too. Gideon stared at the fire. 2 years. The cabin would be empty for 2 years. He'd be alone again, the way he'd been before that November night when everything changed. When would you leave? His voice sounded strange. September. If I get accepted. She was watching him carefully. Are you angry? No. You look angry. I'm not angry. I'm just... He didn't have words for what he was. Proud, terrified, sad, happy for her, and devastated for himself all at once. I'm going to miss you. I'll miss you too. Then why go? Because I need to. Because there's things I need to learn that I can't learn here. Because if I stay, I'll always wonder what I could have become. She paused. And because you taught me to never settle for adequate when I could be excellent. Damn. Using his own words against him. You really want this? He asked. More than anything. Then you should go. Just like that? What do you want me to say? That I'll fall apart without you? I probably will, but that's my problem, not yours. He looked at her. You've spent enough of your life worrying about what other people need. Time to do something for yourself. Her eyes got shiny. What if I fail? Then you fail and you figure out what comes next. But you won't fail. How do you know? Because you're the toughest person I've ever met. And because you've never backed down from a challenge in your life. She wiped her eyes. I'm scared. Good. Means it matters. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers. Above them, A shooting star streaked across the sky and disappeared behind the peaks. "Gideon?" Elsie said quietly. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me go. A lot of fathers wouldn't." "I'm not a lot of fathers." "No, you're better." The application process took 3 months. Elsie wrote essays about her experience as a frontier healer, compiled letters of recommendation from Doc Harrison and Sheriff Harding, and even Judge Morrison. She studied for entrance exams using books Miss Porter borrowed from the Territorial Library. Gideon watched her work with the same intensity she brought to everything else and felt his chest tighten with pride and dread in equal measure. The acceptance letter came in July. Elsie read it twice, her hands shaking. Then she looked at Gideon with tears streaming down her face and said, "I got in." "Of course you did." "I got in. I'm going to Denver. I'm going to be a real nurse." "You're already a real nurse. This just makes it official." She threw her arms around him and he held her tight, breathing in the smell of pine smoke and soap that always clung to her hair. His daughter, who wasn't really his daughter by blood, but was his in every way that mattered. "I'm so proud of you," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you." "You could have, but I'm glad you didn't have to." The weeks before her departure were bittersweet. They spent their days doing the things they'd always done, checking traps, hunting, teaching Bear not to steal food from the drying racks. But everything felt weighted with the knowledge that it was temporary, that soon this life would just be Gideon's again. One afternoon, a family showed up at the cabin looking for Elsie. Their daughter had been burned badly by a cooking fire, and the wound was getting infected. Elsie cleaned it, applied a poultice she'd made from herbs, and gave the parents strict instructions on keeping it clean. As they were leaving, the father pressed coins into Elsie's hand. "Thank you, you saved her life." After they left, Elsie stared at the money. "They paid me." "You did work. People pay for work. It doesn't feel like work. It feels like the only thing I'm supposed to be doing." "That's how you know you found the right path." She looked at him. "Did you ever feel that way? About trapping?" "No, trapping's just what I did to survive. You're doing something that matters." "You matter." "Now I do, because of you." He took the coins and put them in the jar where they kept savings. "You're going to need money in Denver, for books and supplies and whatever else students need. What about you?" "I'll manage. I always have." But the truth was, Gideon had no idea how he'd manage. The cabin was going to feel like a grave. The silence would be crushing. He'd gotten used to Elsie's presence the way you get used to breathing. Necessary, automatic, essential. 2 weeks before she was supposed to leave, Sheriff Harding rode up with news that drove all thoughts of Denver from their minds. "There's a situation," Harding said. His face was grim. "The Henderson family. The ones 2 valleys over. Someone broke into their cabin last night, killed the father. Mother and 3 kids are missing." Gideon felt ice in his veins. "Missing how?" "Tracks lead north into the high country. Whoever took them knew what they were doing, covered their trail pretty well, but not well enough." "How many?" "At least 3 men, maybe 4, armed." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you know those mountains better than anyone. And because the territorial marshal who's supposed to be handling this won't get here for another week. By then..." Harding didn't finish. He didn't have to. Elsie appeared in the doorway. "I'm coming with you." "No," Gideon said. "They might be hurt. They'll need medical help. It's too dangerous. You're going anyway. At least if I'm there, I can help if we find them." Gideon looked at Harding, who shrugged. "She's got a point." "I don't like it." "I don't care," Elsie said. "Those kids are 10, 8, and 5 years old. If they're hurt and scared in the mountains, they need someone who knows how to help them. That's me." She was right. Gideon hated that she was right, but she was. "Fine. But you do exactly what I say. No arguments." "No arguments." They left within the hour, Bear loping alongside them as they picked up the trail. The tracks were faint but readable. 4 horses, 1 carrying double. They headed north toward the high peaks, into country so rough most people avoided it, even in summer. "Why take them up there?" Harding asked. "Fewer people. More places to hide." Gideon studied the ground. "They're moving fast, confident. They know where they're going." "How long ago?" 10, 12 hours, maybe. They pushed hard, following the trail as it climbed higher into the mountains. By nightfall, they'd gained ground but hadn't caught up. They made cold camp, no fire to give away their position, and took turns on watch. Gideon couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about 3 kids being dragged through the wilderness by men who'd already proven they were capable of murder. Kept thinking about Elsie, who'd insisted on coming, who could get hurt or worse if things went bad. "You're worrying," Elsie said quietly from her bedroll. "I'm allowed to worry. We'll find them. And if we don't, then we tried. That's more than most people would do." At dawn, they found the first sign that they were close: a child's shoe, dropped and abandoned. Then a piece of torn cloth. Then finally smoke rising from a canyon ahead. Gideon held up his hand. They dismounted and crept forward on foot, leaving the horses with Harding, while Gideon and Elsie moved ahead to scout. The camp was in a box canyon, defensible and hidden. 4 men sat around a fire, passing a bottle between them. Off to the side, tied to a tree, were Mrs. Henderson and her 3 children. They looked terrified but alive. 4 against 1, Elsie whispered. "Bad odds." 3 against 4, Harding's coming up behind us. "Still bad odds. We've faced worse." They waited until Harding caught up, then Gideon outlined the plan. Simple, direct, probably stupid. But it was all they had. "I go in from the front, get their attention. You 2 circle around, cut the family loose, get them out. I'll hold the men off long enough for you to get clear." "That's a terrible plan," Elsie said. "You got a better one?" She didn't. Gideon checked his rifle, made sure his knife was loose in its sheath, looked at Elsie one more time. "If this goes wrong, it won't. If it does, you take those kids and you run. You don't look back, you understand? Gideon, promise me." She clenched her jaw. "I promise." He moved into position, took a breath, then stepped out into the open with his rifle raised. "Let them go!" The 4 men spun, grabbing for weapons. One of them, a big man with a scar across his face, laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot all 4 of us?" "If I have to." Tough talk for one man. Who said I was alone? The bluff worked for about 3 seconds. Then Scarface realized there was nobody else visible and raised his pistol. Gideon shot him in the shoulder before he could fire. All hell broke loose. The other 3 men scattered, reaching for rifles. Gideon dropped behind a boulder as bullets whined overhead. He could hear Harding moving through the brush on the left. Could see Elsie creeping toward the prisoners on the right. Just had to keep them busy long enough. He fired twice more, driving the men into cover. One of them circled around, trying to flank him. Gideon caught the movement and shifted position, his old trapper instincts reading the terrain like a book. The man stepped out from behind a tree, and Gideon put a bullet through his leg. He went down screaming, 2 down, 2 to go. Then he heard Elsie shout. One of the men had spotted her cutting the ropes. He was moving toward her, gun raised. Gideon didn't think, just acted, stood up from cover, and fired. The shot went wide, but it got the man's attention. He turned toward Gideon just as Harding came up behind him and cracked him across the skull with a rifle butt. The man dropped. The last one tried to run. Bear came out of nowhere and hit him like a freight train, drove him to the ground. By the time Gideon got there, the man was begging the dog not to kill him. "Call it off," he gasped. "Please." Gideon whistled. Bear backed away, still growling. Within minutes, they had all 4 men disarmed and bound. Mrs. Henderson was crying, clutching her children. The kids were shaking but unharmed. Elsie checked them over with practiced efficiency. "They're okay. Dehydrated, terrified, but okay." "Thank you," Mrs. Henderson sobbed. "Thank you so much." "Thank Gideon," Elsie said. "He's the one who found you." But Gideon was already moving away, his hands shaking with adrenaline and something darker. He'd killed men before, in self-defense or defense of others. It never got easier, never stopped leaving a mark. Elsie found him sitting on a rock, staring at nothing. "You okay?" "Fine." "Liar." He almost smiled. "I'm alive. That's something." "You could have been killed. When you stood up to draw that man's fire." "I know." "Then why did you do it?" "Because he was about to shoot you, and I'd rather die than watch that happen." She sat down beside him. "That's the second time you've said something like that." "Means I mean it." They sat in silence while Harding got the prisoners ready for transport, and Mrs. Henderson tried to calm her children. The sun was setting, painting the canyon walls orange and gold. "I've been thinking," Elsie said, About Denver. Gideon's stomach dropped. What about it? Maybe I shouldn't go. Maybe I'm needed here. There's people in these mountains who need help and no, but no. You're not staying because you're scared. You're not staying because you think I can't handle being alone. You're going because it's what you need to do. But what if something happens while I'm gone? What if someone needs me and I'm not here? Then someone else will help them, or they'll manage, or they won't. He looked at her. You can't save everyone, Elsie. You can only do your best and hope it's enough. And right now, your best means going to Denver and learning how to be the kind of nurse who can save people I can't. What about you? I'll be here when you get back. Promise? Promise. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm going to miss this. The mountains. The cabin. You. It'll all still be here. I'll still be here. 2 years is a long time. I've survived longer. They rode back to Black Ridge with the Henderson family and the 4 prisoners. The town turned out to welcome them back, to thank Gideon and Elsie and Harding for the rescue. But Gideon barely heard the praise. He was too busy watching Elsie, storing up memories of her in these mountains before she left for a world he'd never be part of. The morning she left for Denver, the weather was perfect. Clear skies, warm sun, the kind of day that made you believe good things were possible. Gideon helped her pack her trunk onto the stagecoach. 2 years' worth of clothes, books, supplies, everything she'd need for a new life. You got everything? He asked. I think so. Money? Yes. Letters of introduction? Yes. Your medical texts? Gideon. She put her hand on his arm. I've got everything. Stop worrying. But he couldn't stop. Worrying was all he had left. Write to me, he said, every week. And if you need anything, I'll tell you, I promise. The driver called for passengers to board. Elsie picked up her small bag, the one she'd carry with her. Then she turned and threw her arms around Gideon. He held her tight, this girl who'd changed everything, who'd taught him how to be human again. I love you, she said. I love you too. Thank you for saving me. You saved me first. She pulled back, wiping her eyes. I'll be back before you know it. I know. But he didn't know. 2 years felt like forever. She climbed into the stagecoach. The driver snapped the reins. The horses started moving. Gideon stood there watching until the coach disappeared around the bend, taking his daughter toward a future he'd helped build but would never fully be part of. Bear whined beside him. Yeah, Gideon said. I know. The cabin was exactly as empty as he'd feared. That first night, Gideon sat by the fire with Bear at his feet and tried to remember what life had been like before Elsie. Quiet, simple, meaningless. He'd been dying up here, slowly bleeding out from loneliness and guilt and the weight of all his failures. And then a 6-year-old girl with hollow eyes had given him a reason to live. Now she was gone, building her own life. And he was happy for her, proud of her, terrified that she'd realize she didn't need him anymore. The letters started coming 2 weeks later. Elsie wrote about Denver, the noise, the crowds, the endless buildings. She wrote about her classes, her instructors, the other students who came from all over the territory. She wrote about feeling overwhelmed and excited and homesick all at once. Gideon wrote back, his letters short and clumsy. He wasn't good with words, but he told her about the mountain, about Bear learning to tree squirrels, about the Henderson family stopping by to thank him again for the rescue. He didn't tell her how much he missed her, how the cabin felt like a tomb, how some mornings he woke up and forgot she was gone, called out her name before remembering. The seasons turned. Summer faded to fall, fall to winter. The snows came early and deep, burying the trails and isolating Gideon completely for weeks at a time. He didn't mind. The isolation felt right somehow. Appropriate. In the spring, a traveling preacher came through and asked if Gideon had given any thought to what happened after death. I'll find out when I get there, Gideon said. Don't you want to be prepared? Been preparing my whole life. Figure that's enough. The preacher left looking disappointed. Gideon went back to his traps. But the question stuck with him. What did happen after? Would he see Mary again? His mother, who died when he was 10? Would they be proud of what he'd done with Elsie, or disappointed that it took him so long to get it right? He didn't have answers, just more questions. The first year passed slowly, like wading through deep snow. Elsie came home for a week in summer. She looked different, older, more polished, confident in a way that was new. She wore her hair different, talked about medical procedures and theories that went over Gideon's head. But when they went up to the high meadow where they used to hunt, she was just Elsie again, his daughter. The girl who could read tracks and call birds and find her way through wilderness that would kill most people. "How's it really going?" Gideon asked. "It's hard. I'm behind the other students in some ways. I never learned proper anatomy, just what I figured out from Doc Harrison's books. But I'm ahead in practical experience. I've done things they've only read about." "You're keeping up, though?" "Better than keeping up. I'm near the top of my class." Pride swelled in Gideon's chest. "Of course you are." "I miss this, though, the mountains, the quiet, the feeling that I'm actually helping people instead of just studying how to help them." "You're learning so you can help more people later." "I know, it just feels—" She trailed off. "What?" "Selfish. Like I abandoned the people here who need me." "You didn't abandon anyone. You're getting better so you can come back and do more good. That's not selfish, that's smart." She smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just old enough to fake it." The week went too fast. Before Gideon knew it, he was putting her on the stagecoach again, watching her disappear toward Denver. "One more year," she called out the window. "One more year," he agreed. The second year was easier. Gideon knew what to expect now. The loneliness, the silence, the way time moved differently when you had nothing to measure it against except changing seasons. He kept himself busy, helped neighbors with problems, started teaching a young boy from the valley how to trap, took in another stray dog when Bear got lonely, and he waited. Elsie's letters came regularly. She wrote about her final exams, about job offers she was getting from hospitals in Denver, and even as far as San Francisco. She wrote about opportunities he'd never dreamed of for her. And Gideon wrote back, saying she should take whatever opportunity made her happiest, even though every word felt like swallowing glass. 2 weeks before she was supposed to graduate, Gideon rode down to Black Ridge and did something he'd never done before. He went to the church. The priest, a young man who'd arrived while Gideon was avoiding town, looked surprised to see him. "Mr. Vale, this is unexpected." "Got a question." "I'll try to answer. If you spend your whole life doing one good thing, does it make up for all the bad you did before?" The priest thought about it. "I'm not sure life works like a ledger, but I think the good we do matters, especially when it's hard, especially when it costs us something. Even if the good thing was just not being a coward for once? Sometimes that's the hardest thing of all." Gideon left feeling not exactly better, but less weighted down. Like maybe he'd done enough. Like maybe Mary would forgive him. Like maybe he could forgive himself. Graduation day, Gideon wore his good clothes and rode the 300 miles to Denver. The city was overwhelming, noise and people and buildings that blocked out the sky. He hated it immediately. But he pushed through, found the hospital where the ceremony was being held, and took a seat in the back. When Elsie walked across the stage to receive her certificate, Gideon felt his eyes burn. This strong, capable woman who could heal the sick and face down danger without flinching, he'd helped build that. Not alone, but he'd been there. He'd given her the foundation to become this. After the ceremony, Elsie found him in the crowd. She was crying, laughing, introducing him to her classmates and instructors. "This is my father," she kept saying. "Gideon Vale, he's the reason I'm here." She did the work, Gideon told everyone. I just didn't get in her way. That night, in a hotel room that felt too small and too enclosed, Elsie told him her plans. "I got job offers, good ones. Denver, San Francisco, even one from a hospital in Boston." Gideon's heart sank. "You should take one." "I'm not going to." "Why not?" "Because there's a job I want more. Doc Harrison's retiring. He asked if I'd come back and take over his practice. Serve the people in Black Ridge and the surrounding mountains." "That's not much of a practice." "It's exactly the practice I want." She looked at him. "I went to school to learn how to help people. The people I want to help are back home. Is that okay with you?" "You don't need my permission. I want it anyway." Gideon felt something crack open in his chest, relief and joy and gratitude all mixed together. "Then yeah, it's more than okay." "Good, because I'm moving back in June, and I'm going to need help setting up a proper clinic, someone who knows how to build things and isn't afraid of hard work." "I might know someone." She grinned. Thought you might. They rode back to Black Ridge together, the mountains rising around them like old friends welcoming them home. When the cabin came into view, Gideon felt something he hadn't felt in 2 years. Complete. Elsie set up her practice in a small building next to Doc Harrison's old office. Word spread fast, and soon people were coming from all over the high country to see the nurse who'd learned her trade in Denver but understood mountain life. She was good. Better than good. She saved lives that would have been lost, delivered babies in conditions that would have terrified city doctors, treated injuries and illnesses with a combination of book knowledge and frontier practicality that made her invaluable. And every evening, she rode back up to the cabin where Gideon had dinner waiting and the fire burning. They fell into a rhythm, working during the day, sharing meals at night, sitting by the fire and talking about everything and nothing. One evening, about a year after she'd come back, Elsie said something that had been building for a while. I want to change my name, legally. To what? Keep Vale as my last name, but change Elsie. She paused. I want to be Eleanor Vale. Eleanor's what my mother named me before she decided I wasn't worth keeping. I want to take it back. Make it mine on my terms. Eleanor Vale, Gideon said, testing it out. Sounds official. Is that okay? It's your name. You should be called whatever you want. Will you still call me Elsie? Probably. Hard to break old habits. She smiled. Good. I like when you call me Elsie. It reminds me of who I used to be and how far I've come. The years kept passing. Eleanor turned 21, then 25, then 30. She became a fixture in the high country, the person everyone called when something went wrong. She expanded her clinic, took on a young apprentice, a girl from the valley who reminded Gideon of Eleanor at that age. Gideon got older. His hair went from gray to white. His hands developed arthritis. He couldn't trap the high country anymore, couldn't ride as far or as fast. But he could still teach, could still help Eleanor with her clinic, could still sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the peaks and feel grateful for every unexpected day. When he was 65, Sheriff Harding died. The funeral brought the whole territory together. Gideon stood beside Eleanor and remembered all the times Harding had helped them, all the ways the old sheriff had chosen kindness when he could have chosen law. He was a good man, Eleanor said, best kind. The kind who helped because it was right, not because he wanted credit. Like you. I'm not that good. You're better. The territorial governor came through the following spring and held a ceremony honoring citizens who'd made significant contributions to the region. Eleanor's name was called for her medical work, but so was Gideon's for the Henderson Rescue, for teaching the next generation of trappers, for being, as the governor put it, an example of frontier courage and integrity. Gideon stood there embarrassed while people clapped. Afterward, Eleanor hugged him so tight he couldn't breathe. I'm so proud of you, she said. I didn't do anything special. You saved my life. You raised me. You showed me what it means to be good when the world's trying to make you bitter. She pulled back and looked at him. That's pretty special. When Gideon turned 70, Eleanor threw him a party. Half the territory showed up, people whose lives he'd touched, kids he'd taught, families Eleanor had helped. They filled the town hall, brought food and music and stories. Miss Porter, retired now and living with her sister, told everyone about the day Elsie had testified in the hearing, how she'd stood up to the whole court with fire in her eyes. Jack Donnelly, gray and weathered but still alive, talked about getting his ass handed to him by a mountain man protecting his daughter's honor. And Eleanor stood up and gave a speech that made Gideon's eyes burn. This man, she said, taught me everything that matters. Not just how to survive, but why survival is worth fighting for. He taught me that I was valuable when everyone else treated me like garbage. He taught me that love is action, not words. And he taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. She raised her glass. To Gideon Vale, the best father I never should have needed, but couldn't have lived without. Everyone drank. Gideon tried not to cry and failed. The winters got harder as Gideon aged. His bones ached in the cold. His breath came shorter. The high country that had once been his whole world started feeling too vast, too demanding. Eleanor saw it happening and didn't say anything, just quietly moved some of her medical supplies to the cabin, so she had a reason to check on him daily. I'm not dying yet, Gideon told her. I know. Then quit hovering. I'm not hovering, I'm visiting my father. Every day? Is there a law against that? There wasn't. So Gideon stopped complaining and started appreciating the company. On a cold November evening, almost 30 years to the day after he'd first seen her in that tavern, Eleanor asked Gideon a question. Do you have any regrets? They were sitting by the fire, Bear's grandson, also named Bear, asleep at their feet. Outside, the wind howled the way it always did this time of year. About what? Everything. Your life. Your choices. Gideon thought about it. I regret not saving Mary. That'll never go away. I regret the years I spent alone up here thinking I deserved to suffer. He looked at her. But I don't regret walking into that tavern. I don't regret spending every dollar I had. I don't regret any of it. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. They made us who we are. Eleanor was quiet. Then she said, I used to wonder what my life would have been like if you hadn't been there that night. If you'd looked away like everyone else. And I think I would have died. Maybe not right away, but eventually. I would have given up. Believed what everyone told me about being worthless. Let it destroy me from the inside out. You're stronger than that. I am now. Because you taught me to be. She reached over and took his hand. You saved my life, Gideon. Not just that night. Every day after. You saved me over and over just by refusing to give up on me. You saved mine too, Gideon said. I was already dead when you came along. Just didn't know it yet. They sat holding hands while the fire burned low and the wind sang outside, and two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances possible understood just how lucky they'd been. Gideon lived to be 76. He died on a clear spring morning with Eleanor beside him and the cabin door open so he could see the mountains one last time. It was peaceful as deaths go. No pain, no fear. Just a gradual letting go. His last words were, Did I do okay? You did perfect, Eleanor said through tears. You did perfect. The funeral brought everyone. They buried him on the ridge above the cabin where he could look down at the valley and the peaks beyond. The gravestone was simple. Gideon Vale, he refused to look away. Eleanor stood at the grave long after everyone else left, Bear sitting patiently beside her. Thank you, she said to the stone, for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself. For teaching me that I was worth loving. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying the smell of snow from the high peaks. Eleanor went back to the cabin that night and sat in Gideon's chair by the fire. The place felt empty without him. Would always feel empty without him. But it was still home. She picked up the book he'd been reading, a novel she'd given him last Christmas, and found a letter tucked inside. Her name on the envelope in his rough handwriting. Inside just a few lines. Eleanor, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't mourn too long. I lived a good life, especially the parts with you in it. You asked if I had regrets. Here's the truth. My only regret is that I didn't have more time. Time to see you change more lives. Time to meet your kids if you have them. Time to grow old and useless while you did all the work. But I got enough time to matter. Enough to help raise someone extraordinary. Enough to understand that love, real love, is just showing up and refusing to quit even when everything's hard. You're going to do great things. You already have. And when you do them, remember that you didn't need me to make you special. You always were. I just helped you see it. Love. Your old man. Eleanor read it 3 times. Then she folded it carefully and put it in the box where she kept her most precious things. Her nursing certificate, Gideon's guardianship papers, a photo of them together from her graduation, evidence of a life built from nothing, a family forged in the fire of choosing each other when nobody else would. She went outside and stood on the porch, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, she liked to think Gideon was watching. Maybe with Mary. Maybe with all the people who'd needed him and he'd been too late to save. But he'd saved her, and she'd saved him. And together they'd proven something that the world kept trying to deny. That broken people can heal each other. That family is who you choose, not who you're born to. That sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to look away when everyone else does. The wind picked up, cold and sharp. Winter would come again. The mountains would bury everything in snow. Life would go on, hard and beautiful and unforgiving. But Eleanor would face it the way Gideon had taught her, with courage, with compassion, and with the absolute refusal to give up on the people who needed her most. She went back inside, added wood to the fire, and picked up the medical journal she'd been studying. Tomorrow she had patients to see, people to help, lives to save. The work continued. The mountain stood, and the legacy of a man who'd looked at a terrified child and decided to care lived on in everything his daughter became. Some stories don't have neat endings. Life's too messy for that. But this one had something better. It had meaning. It had love. It had proof that even in the darkest moments, even when the world turns away, one person choosing to give a damn can change everything. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.